My parents boycotted my wedding 10 months ago because my sister had a minor panic attack. I never received an apology, just complete silence. But the moment I posted a photo of my new $243,000 Maserati Gran Turismo on Instagram, my phone lit up with a text from my mother. It did not say congratulations. It said, "We saw your post. Your sister is struggling family meeting at the house tomorrow, 7 p.m." I showed up to their upscale Atlanta home. All right, but I brought a surprise that would permanently shatter their perfect world. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who only reach out when they want something. My name is Kendra. I am 35 years old and I build commercial real estate portfolios for a living. I sat in the driver's seat of my brand new $243,000 Maserati Gran Turismo, the twin-turbo engine purring with a deep, resonant growl that usually brought me a sense of absolute peace. The premium Italian leather steering wheel was perfectly smooth under my hands, the interior smelling of fresh luxury, bespoke craftsmanship, and hard-earned success. I had spent the last decade of my life completely grinding, working 80-hour weeks, negotiating brutal commercial leases, and painstakingly building my boutique firm from the ground up without a single dime of help from my family. I tapped my manicured fingernails against the steering wheel, watching the front door of our modern townhouse, waiting for my husband Trayvon to come out. The evening was supposed to be a romantic celebration, just the two of us taking the new car out for an expensive anniversary dinner at a high-end steakhouse downtown. Then my phone screen suddenly illuminated the dark, sophisticated cabin of the car. The notification banner displayed a name I had not seen on my screen in nearly a year. Brenda, my mother. For 10 agonizing silent months, my parents had treated me like a ghost. They had completely vanished from my life, perfectly comfortable with the deafening silence that followed their ultimate betrayal on the most important day of my life. My heart did a strange, painful stutter as I unlocked the screen. A naive, foolish part of me, the little girl who still craved her mother's elusive approval, thought maybe she was reaching out to finally apologize. Maybe she had seen the photo of the car I proudly posted an hour ago and wanted to express some shred of genuine maternal pride. I opened the message. There was no warm greeting. There was no congratulations on the major milestone. The text read exactly like a cold summons from a dictator. "We saw your post. Your sister is struggling. Family meeting at the house tomorrow at 7 p.m. Do not be late." I stared at the glowing words, the harsh blue light reflecting in my eyes. A cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of my stomach, instantly replacing any joy I had felt about my new purchase. They did not care about my success. They only cared that I had visible liquid assets, while my younger sister Jada was supposedly struggling financially. Jada was 29, the undisputed golden child of the family, and married to Connor, a privileged white tech bro whose startup company was perpetually on the verge of completely collapsing. Connor's startup was some vague algorithmic data processing venture that burned through investor cash faster than it ever generated revenue. Yet Jada still flaunted expensive designer bags, drove luxury leased vehicles, and took lavish vacations to Europe, constantly pretending they were the ultimate power couple of Atlanta. For years, my parents had happily subsidized their lavish lifestyle, treating Connor like a misunderstood genius, while entirely dismissing my thriving real estate firm as a risky little side project that would inevitably fail. The passenger door opened and Trayvon slid into the low-slung seat, his tall, athletic frame settling comfortably into the Italian leather. He looked incredibly handsome in his tailored charcoal suit, a warm, loving smile on his face that faded the absolute second he saw my dark expression. "What happened, baby?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave as his deep brown eyes locked onto mine. I handed him the phone without saying a single word. Trayvon read the message, his strong jaw tightening visibly in the dim light. The soft, ambient lighting of the dashboard highlighted the hard, angry lines of his face as he scoffed, tossing the phone back into my lap with disgust. "The absolute sheer audacity of these people," he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. 10 months of dead silence, Kendra. 10 solid months of acting like we do not even exist. And the absolute second they smell a drop of real money, they snap their fingers and expect you to come running like a dog to save Jada. I put the car in drive, the powerful engine roaring aggressively as we pulled out of our quiet driveway and headed toward the busy highway. "We are going," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles physically ached. "We are going to drive straight to their house in the exact same car that triggered this pathetic little family emergency." Traven looked over at me, his dark eyes reflecting the passing amber streetlights. "Are you completely sure about this?" he asked gently, placing a hand on my knee. "You know exactly what this meeting is about. Connor has run his company into the ground again, and Brenda expects you to blindly open your checkbook to bail out her precious son-in-law." I pressed down hard on the accelerator, feeling the massive raw power of the car surge forward, pushing us deep into our seats. "Let them ask," I replied, my tone turning to absolute ice. "Let them look me dead in the eye and ask for a massive financial handout after what they deliberately did to us." The wide highway stretched out endlessly before us, the glittering Atlanta city skyline fading in the rearview mirror, as we headed toward the affluent, exclusive northern suburbs where my parents lived. The drive usually took 45 minutes, but tonight the miles seemed to disappear rapidly under the wide tires of the Maserati. The silence inside the luxurious cabin was incredibly heavy, thick with the painful, unspoken memories of our ruined wedding day. Trayvon reached across the wide center console and placed his warm, strong hand over mine, offering a silent, vital anchor of unwavering support. "They do not get to dictate your worth, Kendra," he said softly but firmly. "They made their choice when they abandoned us." His true words brought the terrible memory crashing back with brutal, devastating clarity. Exactly 10 months ago, I stood nervously in the elegant bridal suite of a beautiful historic venue downtown, wearing a breathtaking custom gown that took me an entire year of saving to pay off. The string quartet was softly playing downstairs. Our closest friends were eagerly seated, and I was anxiously waiting for my father Desmond to walk through the heavy wooden doors and proudly escort me down the aisle. Instead, my phone had vibrated loudly with a cold, detached text message from him. "Connor's primary investors backed out unexpectedly. Jada is having a severe panic attack. We have to stay here and console them. You are strong, Kendra. You will be perfectly fine." Just like that, my parents callously erased my entire wedding from their reality. They actively chose to soothe the dramatic emotional distress of my sister and her husband, over witnessing my legal marriage to the man I loved with all my heart. I walked down that long aisle completely alone that day, holding my head up high while the empty prominent chairs in the front row screamed their absence to everyone in attendance. I did not shed a single pathetic tear. I married Traven, danced happily until midnight, and permanently closed the heavy door on ever seeking my toxic family's approval again. While Brenda and Desmond blindly poured their hard-earned retirement savings into Connor's black hole of a business, Traven and I had quietly and aggressively built our own real estate empire. We strategically acquired premium commercial spaces, beautifully revitalized them, and leased them to high-paying, reliable corporate tenants. We worked in absolute silence, letting our massive success speak entirely for itself. Now my hypocritical parents wanted to desperately drag me back into their toxic, draining orbit simply because the golden child had finally hit a brick wall. As we exited the busy highway and turned onto the familiar, quiet, tree-lined streets of my childhood neighborhood, Trayvon broke the heavy silence. "Whatever happens in that house, we are a united team," he said firmly. "We do not give them a single inch. They foolishly think they can summon you like a disobedient teenager, but they have absolutely no idea who they are dealing with anymore." I smiled, a cold, highly calculated expression that felt foreign, yet empowering on my face. "They think my wealth is their personal safety net," I murmured, turning smoothly onto my parents' perfectly manicured street. They think I am the exact same desperate little girl who used to beg endlessly for their attention. They are about to get a very harsh, devastating reality check. The sprawling brick colonial home loomed ahead, sitting perfectly manicured at the end of a long, wide, circular driveway. The bright exterior landscape lights illuminated the pristine green lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges, a physical testament to the obsessive image of perfection my parents ruthlessly maintained for their neighbors. I pulled the roaring Maserati smoothly into the wide driveway, deliberately parking it directly behind Connor's leased black Range Rover. The financial contrast between the two vehicles was stark and entirely deliberate. I killed the powerful engine, and the sudden heavy silence in the car was absolutely deafening. "Let us go settle this pathetic family business," I said firmly, unbuckling my seatbelt. We walked together up the intricate brick pathway toward the heavy oak front door. The distinct scent of my mother's expensive floral perfume wafted through the humid evening air even before the door officially opened, a smell that used to bring me childhood comfort, but now only triggered my sharpest defensive instincts. I could easily hear the murmur of Connor's confident, entitled voice, and Jada's dramatic, exaggerated sighs coming directly from the formal living room. They were already actively setting the stage, playing their assigned familiar roles in this toxic theatrical production. The heavy oak front door swung open violently before I could even reach out for the polished brass knocker. My father Desmond stood there, his tall, broad frame completely blocking the entrance, wearing a crisp, expensive polo shirt and an expression of profound, absolute irritation. There was no warm smile of greeting, no heartfelt apology for the past 10 months of silence, no basic acknowledgement of Trayvon standing right beside me. "You are late," Desmond said, his voice sharp, cold, and incredibly demanding. "Your mother has been anxiously pacing the living room for 20 minutes waiting for you. Come inside right now and sit down. Connor needs to explain the current financial situation to you." He turned his back and walked away, expecting me to follow blindly like an obedient, subservient child. Trayvon and I exchanged a single deep, knowing look. I stepped boldly over the threshold into the massive house I grew up in, leaving every ounce of my previous vulnerability at the door. The air inside felt immediately suffocating, thick with blinding entitlement and heavy, unspoken demands. As I walked proudly down the long hallway toward the living room, I squared my shoulders and raised my chin high. The designated family scapegoat had finally arrived, but I brought a completely different set of rules with me. I was completely ready for an absolute war. The air conditioning in the formal living room was running high, but the atmosphere felt instantly suffocating the moment I stepped off the hardwood hallway and onto the plush Persian rug. My mother Brenda sat perfectly poised on the center cushion of the cream-colored linen sofa. She wore a tailored navy blouse, her posture stiff and unyielding, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water like a weapon. My father Desmond stood by the massive marble fireplace, his arms crossed tightly over his broad chest. His presence was designed to be intimidating, a physical barrier meant to enforce absolute compliance. Jada, my younger sister, was curled into the far corner of the matching love seat, dabbing her completely dry eyes with a tissue, playing the exhausted, fragile victim to absolute perfection. And then there was Connor. He sat spread out on the expensive leather armchair, taking up as much space as physically possible. One ankle rested casually on his knee, and a look of supreme, arrogant confidence was plastered across his pale face. He looked at me not with the humility of a man whose business was collapsing, but with the smug expectation of a spoiled child waiting for his allowance. Before Trayvon and I could even choose a place to sit, Brenda reached beside her and picked up a thick, glossy document. She tossed it onto the glass coffee table and pushed it firmly in my direction. The heavy stack of papers slid across the smooth surface and stopped exactly inches from my knees. I looked down at the bold printed letters on the cover page. It was a commercial business loan agreement drafted for the exact sum of $150,000. The borrower listed was Connor Tech Startup. The designated lender line was entirely blank, just waiting for my personal signature. I did not reach for the paper. I stood perfectly still, feeling Trayvon step up close beside me. His solid presence, a reassuring anchor in a room filled with hostility. Pick up a pen. Kendra, my mother commanded, her voice completely devoid of any maternal warmth. We have already had the family lawyer review the terms. It is a standard bridge loan to get Connor through the next quarter. You need to sign it tonight so the funds can be wired to his corporate account by tomorrow morning. I stared at her, letting the sheer audacity of her demand hang heavily in the quiet room. You summoned me to your house after 10 months of absolute silence, I said, my voice low and steady, to demand that I hand over $150,000 to a man who does not even have the basic respect to ask me himself. Connor scoffed, shifting his weight in the leather chair. Oh, please, Kendra, let us drop the dramatic act, he sneered, waving a hand in the air. We all saw the social media post this afternoon. You just dropped $250,000 on a flashy Italian sports car. You clearly have massive amounts of liquid cash burning a hole in your pocket. Jada is your own flesh and blood. Her husband is building a revolutionary software platform. It is your basic familial duty to step up and provide the capital we need to scale the business. I looked at Connor, feeling a deep, profound sense of disgust. His revolutionary software platform had been bleeding money for 3 consecutive years. He had burned through his initial seed funding, he had burned through 2 rounds of venture capital, and he had completely drained my parents' retirement savings. Now he was greedily eyeing my bank accounts, treating my hard-earned wealth as his own personal community slush fund. Desmond stepped away from the fireplace, his heavy footsteps echoing in the tense silence. Your sister is struggling, Kendra, he said, his deep voice carrying the same authoritative tone he used to discipline me when I was a child. Connor investors got cold feet because of minor market fluctuations. They need a small injection of cash to keep operations running smoothly. You have the money. You flaunt it online for the whole world to see. It is time you stop being so incredibly selfish and start acting like a supportive member of this family. They spoke to me as if my success was a lucky accident, as if the 80-hour work weeks, the sleepless nights, the ruthless negotiations, and the immense stress I endured to build my real estate firm were completely irrelevant. To them, my money was just a convenient resource they could tap into whenever the golden child experienced a minor inconvenience. They felt entirely entitled to the fruits of my labor, while simultaneously despising the independence that allowed me to earn it. Jada let out a loud theatrical sob, burying her face in her hands. You do not understand how hard it has been, Kendra, she whined, her voice muffled by the tissue. We might have to sell the vacation condo if the business fails. We are drowning, and you are just parading around in a Maserati, rubbing your wealth in our faces while we suffer. You owe us this. You owe the family this. I looked at the 4 of them, taking in their expectant, demanding faces. 10 months ago, they chose to abandon me on my wedding day because Jada had a panic attack over this exact same failing business. They had left me to walk down the aisle alone, treating the most sacred day of my life as an annoying distraction from Connor financial mismanagement. They never called to apologize. They never sent a card. They simply vanished until the very second they realized I had access to a massive amount of unallocated capital. I finally moved. I slowly reached down and placed my fingers on the thick loan document. Brenda let out a small sigh of relief, assuming she had won. Assuming I had caved to the intense pressure, just like I used to do when I was younger. Connor smirked, leaning back further in his chair, already mentally spending my money on his bloated payroll and expensive corporate lunches. I did not pick up the pen lying next to the contract. Instead, I placed my index finger on the center of the document and calmly, smoothly slid it directly across the glass table. The paper stopped right at Connor's feet. I kept my posture completely relaxed. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream or cry or show a single ounce of emotional distress. I looked Connor dead in the eye, holding his arrogant gaze until he visibly shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I do not fund bad investments, I said. The words fell from my lips like heavy stones, landing with absolute devastating finality in the center of the quiet room. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. For 3 long seconds, nobody breathed. Then the room completely exploded. "Excuse me," Connor yelled, his face flushing an angry mottled red as he sat up straight. "How dare you speak about my company that way? You build basic commercial properties, Kendra. You are a glorified landlord. You have absolutely no idea how the tech industry works, or what my platform is actually worth." Brenda shot up from the sofa, her crystal glass slamming down onto the side table. "You selfish, ungrateful disgrace," she screamed, her composure completely shattering. "We bring you into our home to offer you a chance to redeem yourself, to finally do something good for your sister, and you sit there acting like a stuck-up, arrogant snob. You are a disgrace to this family. You always have been. You are going to sign that paper!" Kendra Desmond bellowed, stepping toward me with a dark, threatening glare. "You are going to sign it right now, or you can consider yourself permanently cut off from this family. You will not be welcome in this house ever again." I looked at my father, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, hard pity. "You cut me off 10 months ago, Desmond," I replied, my voice slicing through their chaotic shouting with lethal precision. "You made your choice when you skipped my wedding to coddle a grown man who cannot even balance a basic corporate ledger. I am not your bank. I am not your backup plan. And I am certainly not signing away $150,000 of my money to a man who cannot even pay his own commercial rent on time." Connor flinched visibly at the mention of his rent, but he quickly recovered, masking his panic with more loud, blustering anger. "You are pathetic, Kendra," he spat, standing up to try and intimidate me. "You think driving a fancy car makes you better than us. You are just a bitter, jealous woman who cannot stand to see Jada happy." I turned my back on him, completely dismissing his entire existence. I looked at Trayvon, who had stood silently by my side the entire time, radiating quiet, dangerous strength. "Let us go," I said softly. "We have completely wasted our evening." Trayvon nodded, turning smoothly and opening the heavy front door for me. I walked out into the warm, humid night air, the sound of my mother hysterical screaming fading behind me as the door clicked shut. The heavy, oppressive weight of the house instantly lifted off my shoulders. I felt an incredible surging rush of pure adrenaline and absolute freedom. I walked down the brick pathway, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. The beautiful, sleek lines of my Maserati Gran Turismo sat waiting in the driveway, reflecting the bright security lights. I pulled open the heavy door and slid into the luxurious driver's seat, taking a deep, calming breath of the expensive leather scent. Trayvon got in beside me, a wide, brilliant smile spreading across his handsome face. "That was incredible," he said, laughing softly. "You did not even flinch, Kendra. You looked at him like he was an absolute insect." I reached out and pressed the ignition button. The massive twin-turbo engine roared to life, shattering the quiet suburban peace with a deep, aggressive mechanical growl. The sound vibrated through the chassis, matching the intense, thrilling energy coursing through my veins. I shifted the car into reverse, backing smoothly out of their long, circular driveway. I glanced at the house one last time, seeing the silhouette of my father standing angrily in the front window. A slow, knowing smile spread across my face as I pulled onto the dark street, accelerating quickly into the night. They thought I was just being stubborn. They thought I was just a petty, bitter sister holding on to a silly grudge over a missed wedding. They thought I refused the loan because I simply wanted to punish them by withholding my cash. They had absolutely no idea about the massive strategic moves I had been making in the dark. Connor was desperate for cash because his landlords were breathing down his neck, threatening to lock him out of his massive, expensive downtown office space. He had been dodging their calls for 3 months, hoping to secure this exact family bailout to cover his massive arrears. What Connor did not know, what Brenda and Desmond and Jada could not possibly comprehend, was that the faceless corporate holding company that had quietly purchased his office building 2 weeks ago belonged entirely to me. I did not need to give Connor a loan to save his business because I had already bought the ground his business stood on. And tomorrow morning my legal team was going to send him a very different kind of paperwork. They thought I was just driving away in a flashy car, but I was driving away with the absolute power to completely destroy them. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my commercial real estate firm, casting sharp, geometric shadows across the polished marble floors of the main lobby. I had arrived at 6 a.m., channeling the residual adrenaline from last night into finalizing the permits for my new boutique hotel project. My firm was a sanctuary of order and high-level transactions, a massive contrast to the chaotic emotional warfare of my parents' house. I was standing just outside my heavy glass office doors, handing a stack of newly signed commercial leases to my assistant Marcus, when the pristine quiet of the morning was violently shattered. Kendra. The shrill, demanding voice echoed through the expansive lobby, making two junior associates physically jump at their desks. I turned slowly, gripping a sleek leather binder in my hands. Jada was storming past the front reception desk, completely ignoring the security guard who was uselessly calling out for her to stop. My younger sister looked unhinged. Her designer trench coat was hastily thrown over a wrinkled silk blouse, and her signature perfect blowout was messy and completely disorganized. She marched across the marble floor, her expensive stilettos striking the ground like angry hammers. The golden child had officially invaded my territory. I raised a single hand, signaling to my security guard to stand down. I wanted to handle this personally. I handed the binder to Marcus without breaking eye contact with my sister. "Give us a moment," I said quietly. Marcus nodded and quickly vanished down the corridor, leaving me alone to face the impending hurricane. Jada stopped mere inches from my face, her chest heaving with exertion and pure rage. "How dare you walk out on us last night?" she hissed, her voice vibrating with aggressive entitlement. "You completely embarrassed Mom in front of Dad, and you disrespected Connor in his own family home. You know exactly how much pressure we are under right now. We are facing a total financial disaster, and you sit there playing petty games with your ridiculous checkbook." I looked at her flushed, angry face, feeling a strange cold wave of absolute calm wash over my entire body. "I do not play games, Jada," I replied, my tone perfectly level, dropping the temperature in the lobby by 10 degrees. "I operate a highly successful commercial firm. I deal in hard assets, guaranteed returns, and verified corporate ledgers. Connor runs a vanity project built on borrowed money and fake prestige. I told you all last night, and I will repeat it for you right now so you clearly understand. I do not fund bad investments." Jada let out a harsh, bitter laugh, throwing her hands up in the air. "Oh, listen to the great and powerful real estate mogul," she mocked, stepping even closer to my personal space. "You think you are so incredibly superior because you scraped together a few ugly brick buildings downtown. You have always been insanely jealous of me, Kendra. You have always been bitter because Mom and Dad actually care about my life, my marriage, and my success. You are just holding back this money to punish me for the wedding." Her words hit the air like toxic venom. The wedding. The absolute nerve she had to bring up that specific day in my own office. I kept my expression entirely neutral, but my heart rate immediately spiked, hammering a rapid, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "You mean the wedding where my entire biological family decided not to show up?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The wedding where my own father refused to walk me down the aisle because you were throwing a temper tantrum over a business deal." "It was not a temper tantrum, Kendra," Jada screamed, her voice echoing off the glass walls of the corporate lobby. "Connor was losing his primary investors. My entire financial future was collapsing right in front of my eyes. I was having a severe medical panic attack. We needed our parents there to support us through a massive life-altering crisis. Besides," she added, her lips curling into a cruel, vicious sneer, "it is not like you had some grand, elaborate royal wedding anyway. It was just a small-scale, cheap gathering at some generic venue. Mom and Dad knew you and Traven were just keeping things basic. They knew it was not a massive deal if they missed it to handle a real, actual emergency." The air in my lungs completely evaporated. The bustling sounds of the city traffic outside the glass windows faded into absolute dead silence. Jada was still moving her mouth, still spewing her toxic, entitled justifications, but I could no longer hear a single word she was saying. Her cruel, dismissive description of my wedding day acted like a physical, violent trigger, instantly ripping me out of the safety of my corporate lobby and plunging me violently backward into the past. I was no longer standing in my tailored business suit. I was abruptly thrown back to exactly 10 months ago, standing frozen in the center of the elegant bridal suite at the historic downtown estate. The heavy, pristine silk of my custom wedding gown rustled softly around my legs. The room smelled overwhelmingly of expensive white roses and sweet vanilla styling hairspray. Downstairs, I could hear the faint, beautiful hum of the string quartet warming up their instruments, playing the very first notes of the song I had specifically chosen for my father to walk me down the aisle to. My hands were shaking violently as I stared down at the brightly illuminated screen of my cell phone. My three bridesmaids were standing near the tall antique mirrors, laughing and pouring fresh glasses of champagne, completely unaware that my entire world was quietly shattering into a million jagged pieces right behind them. The text message from Desmond glowed brightly on the screen, burning its cruel, indifferent words permanently into my brain. Connor investors backed out unexpectedly. Jada is having a severe panic attack. We have to stay here and console them. You are strong, Kendra. You will be perfectly fine. I read the words 5 times, my mind desperately trying to twist the letters into a different meaning. There was no apology. There was no promise to rush over as soon as they calmed her down. There was absolutely no acknowledgement that in exactly 20 minutes, his oldest daughter was legally binding her life to another human being. He was completely abandoning me to manage the emotional distress of a grown woman whose husband simply lost a business contract. A wave of sheer, intense nausea washed over me. I dropped the phone onto the velvet vanity chair as if it physically burned my skin. The crushing, heavy reality settled over my shoulders, pulling me down toward the floor. They were not coming. My mother, who had spent weeks criticizing my floral arrangements and complaining about the guest list, was not going to be sitting in the front row. My father, the man who was supposed to proudly hand me over to my new husband, was currently sitting in my sister's living room, comforting her over a lost financial portfolio. You are strong, Kendra. You will be perfectly fine. Those 9 words echoed loudly in my head, ringing with decades of toxic family conditioning. My strength, my brutal independence, my ability to quietly handle my own problems had always been my parents' favorite excuse to completely neglect me. Because I did not throw violent tantrums, because I did not demand constant financial bailouts, because I did not require their endless emotional rescuing, they simply treated my existence as an afterthought. They weaponized my resilience, punishing me for being the only stable functioning adult in our deeply dysfunctional family. I looked up slowly, meeting my own devastated reflection in the tall gilded mirror. My carefully applied bridal makeup could not hide the profound, absolute heartbreak fracturing my eyes. I looked completely terrified. I looked like a lost, rejected child standing in an expensive white dress waiting for a family that was never going to arrive. A sharp knock on the heavy wooden door of the bridal suite jerked me out of my paralyzing shock. It was the wedding coordinator peeking her head into the room with a gentle, encouraging smile. 10 minutes, Kendra, she whispered softly. Is your father downstairs ready for the lineup? I swallowed hard, forcing the massive lump of grief down my throat. The physical pain in my chest was excruciating, but a new, entirely different emotion rapidly began to take its place. It started as a tiny spark of heat in the pit of my stomach and quickly flared into a roaring, raging fire of pure, unadulterated anger. They had chosen their priority. They had made their ultimate definitive statement about my value in their lives. I smoothed my hands firmly down the heavy silk fabric of my gown, feeling the exquisite craftsmanship, feeling the reality of the beautiful, independent life Trayvon and I had built entirely on our own. I did not need Desmond to walk me down the aisle. I did not need Brenda to nod in fake approval from the front row. I did not need a single member of my toxic, self-absorbed family to validate my massive success or my profound happiness. I looked directly at the wedding coordinator, forcing my spine perfectly straight and raising my chin high. No, I replied, my voice ringing out clear and unnervingly steady in the quiet room. My father will not be joining us today. I will be walking myself down the aisle. The visceral memory dissolved instantly, violently snapping me back into the stark, bright reality of my corporate lobby. The scent of white roses was entirely replaced by the crisp smell of expensive office espresso. I was back in the present, standing face to face with the exact person who had stolen my parents away from me on the most important day of my existence. Jada was glaring at me, her arms crossed defensively over her chest, still waiting for me to break down and yield to her aggressive demands. She thought my wedding was just a cheap, insignificant gathering. She thought my profound trauma was just a convenient bargaining chip she could use to bully me into signing away my money. Jada was staring at me, expecting compliance, expecting the familiar submission of the family scapegoat. But the woman standing in front of her was no longer a rejected bride, desperate for parental love. I was a commercial powerhouse, a woman who owned the very ground her entitled husband currently walked on. And she was about to find out exactly how strong I had actually become. I blinked away the lingering ghosts of that bridal suite and focused entirely on the frantic, angry woman standing in my pristine corporate lobby. Jada was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling as she waited for my inevitable collapse. She fully expected me to shatter right there on the marble floor. She expected the familiar tears, the desperate apologies, and the immediate submission that our parents had rigorously trained into me since childhood. But I felt absolutely nothing but a deep, profound sense of clarity. The toxic fog had completely lifted. "I did not cry on my wedding day, Jada," I said, my voice echoing smoothly off the tall glass walls of my office. I looked her directly in the eyes, refusing to break contact. Not a single tear fell from my face when I realized you and our parents had chosen a minor business inconvenience over my marriage. I put my phone away, I picked up my bouquet, and I walked down that aisle with my head held high. I married the absolute love of my life, surrounded by people who actually valued me. And in that exact moment, I permanently severed the toxic umbilical cord that kept me tied to this family. Jada took a hesitant step backward, her confident sneer faltering slightly. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "I am talking about the reality of our lives." I continued stepping closer to her, forcing her to look up at me. While Desmond and Brenda have been bleeding their retirement accounts dry, trying to desperately plug the massive holes in Connor's sinking ship, Trayvon and I have been working. We did not whine. We did not demand family bailouts. We quietly and ruthlessly acquired premium commercial properties across this entire city. While Connor was busy hosting pointless, expensive corporate retreats to pretend he was a successful tech founder, I was buying the actual concrete and steel buildings those startups rent from. You think my wedding was a cheap, insignificant gathering because we did not blow $250,000 on party favors. We kept it small so we could pour our capital into hard assets. We built an empire in the absolute dead of night while you were all too busy patting yourselves on the back for simply existing. Jada's mouth opened and closed. She looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. The realization that I was no longer the weak, compliant sister she could easily manipulate was finally sinking in. Her eyes darted around the luxurious lobby, taking in the expensive modern artwork, the busy junior associates working diligently at their desks, and the sheer, undeniable scale of the operation I had built from the ground up. The fabricated narrative she had swallowed for years, the story where I was the pathetic, struggling outsider, and she was the triumphant, successful core of the family, was rapidly disintegrating right in front of her face. But Jada was not ready to surrender. The desperation of her financial ruin pushed her past the point of rational thought. If playing the victim was not going to force my hand, she was going to pivot immediately to open aggressive hostility. Her posture shifted, her hands curling into tight fists at her sides. "You think you are so untouchable, Kendra?" she hissed, her voice dropping into a vicious, calculating register. "You think because your name is on a few commercial leases you can just turn your back on your own blood? You are developing that massive luxury boutique hotel over in Midtown right now. The flagship project you have been bragging about in all the local business journals." I kept my face perfectly still, giving away absolutely no emotion, but a tiny alarm bell rang in the back of my mind. The boutique hotel was my crown jewel. Trayvon and I had sunk millions of dollars in capital into acquiring the land, and drawing up the architectural blueprints. We were completely reliant on a smooth approval process from the city zoning board to break ground by the end of the month. Any significant delay would cost us tens of thousands of dollars a week in carrying costs. Connor knows exactly how much that specific hotel project means to your precious real estate firm. Jada continued a nasty, triumphant smirk, creeping back onto her face. He knows you need your final zoning permits approved at the city council meeting this Friday. She took a step toward me, pointing a manicured finger directly at my chest. Connor comes from old political money, Kendra. You seem to conveniently forget that his uncle sits directly on the city planning and zoning committee. His family has deep-rooted connections in this town that you could not possibly buy with all the money in the world. The brazen, explicit nature of her threat hung heavily in the air between us. She was actually trying to blackmail me right in the middle of my own place of business. Here's how this is going to work. Jada spat, her eyes burning with pure malicious intent. You are going to wire that $150,000 directly into Connor's business account by tomorrow morning. You are going to fund his company just like Mom and Dad asked you to. If that money is not sitting in our ledger by 9 a.m., Connor is making one single phone call to his uncle. He will have your hotel permits tied up in bureaucratic red tape for the next 3 years. He will order endless environmental reviews, arbitrary structural audits, and historical society objections until your carrying costs completely bleed your little real estate empire dry. You will lose millions, Kendra, all because you were too stubborn to hand over a fraction of what you owe this family. Jada crossed her arms over her chest, lifting her chin in a posture of absolute victory. She looked incredibly proud of herself. She honestly believed she had just delivered a fatal checkmate. She thought she had effectively cornered the market on power and that I would immediately crumble under the heavy threat of political sabotage. She expected me to panic, to beg to try and negotiate a lesser amount to save my flagship development. I stood perfectly motionless, letting the sheer unadulterated venom of her words wash over me. The silence in the lobby stretched out for 10 long seconds. I looked at the smug, self-satisfied expression painted across my younger sister's face. I thought about the sheer audacity of walking into my building, threatening my livelihood, and demanding my hard-earned money to subsidize her husband's profound incompetence. And then, despite my best efforts to remain completely stoic, I started to laugh. It started as a soft chuckle deep in my chest, but quickly grew into a genuine, full-throated laugh that echoed loudly off the marble floors and glass walls. The sound was not hysterical or defensive. It was the rich, satisfied laughter of a woman who had just been handed the exact winning lottery ticket she had been waiting for. Jada's smug smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of deep, profound confusion. "What is so funny?" she demanded, taking a nervous half-step backward. "I just told you we are going to completely destroy your business, and you are standing here laughing like a lunatic." I took a deep breath, composing myself and smoothing down the front of my tailored suit jacket. "Oh, Jada," I sighed, shaking my head slowly. "You really have absolutely no idea how the real world actually operates, do you? You think you can waltz into my firm, drop a sloppy amateur blackmail threat, and walk out with a 6-figure wire transfer?" I raised my hand and snapped my fingers twice. Marcus, who had been standing discreetly at the end of the hallway, immediately stepped forward. Beside him, my head of building security, a massive former Marine named David, moved swiftly into the lobby. "David," I said, my voice carrying crisp and clear across the open space. "My sister was just leaving. Please escort her out of the building, and make sure the front desk permanently revokes her visitor access. She is no longer welcome on these premises under any circumstances." Jada's mouth dropped open in pure, unadulterated shock. "You cannot do this!" she shrieked as David calmly but firmly stepped between us, placing a large hand gently but immovably toward the exit. "Connor is going to make that call, Kendra. He will kill your hotel project. I swear to God we will ruin you." I looked at her, flailing desperately as security guided her toward the heavy revolving glass doors. I did not feel a single drop of fear regarding her pathetic threats. I did not feel a shred of familial loyalty or sibling guilt. I only felt the cold, sharp edge of a blade I was about to swing. Make sure Connor makes that phone call, Jada, I called out after her, my voice completely devoid of any mercy. Tell him to use every single dirty political connection his family has. I welcome it. She struggled against the security guard screaming my name through the thick glass as she was finally pushed out onto the bustling city sidewalk. I stood in the lobby watching her stumble in her expensive heels, her face twisted in rage as she pulled out her cell phone to call her husband. Jada thought she was holding a loaded gun to my head. She honestly believed that threatening my hotel permits was the ultimate leverage, the perfect extortion tactic to force my compliance. But her desperate, clumsy attempt at blackmail had just given me an absolute gift. She had just handed me the exact moral and strategic justification I needed to completely ruin them. They wanted to play dirty political games with my construction zoning. That was perfectly fine. I was going to respond by aggressively dismantling the very ground they walked on. I turned on my heel and walked purposefully back toward my corner office, the sound of my shoes clicking a steady rhythmic march of impending destruction. It was time to pull out the commercial deed to Connor's building. The war had officially begun, and I was about to strike the first devastating blow. The adrenaline of the confrontation with Jada was still humming in my veins the following morning. I stood behind my massive mahogany desk, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Atlanta skyline. It was Friday, the day my zoning permits were supposed to be finalized by the city council. I watched the tiny figures moving on the streets below, calculating my exact next move. The air in my office was crisp and cool, a stark contrast to the boiling tension I knew was brewing across town in my parents' house. They were waiting for me to break today. They were waiting for the desperate phone call, begging for mercy, pleading for Connor to call off his political attack dogs. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, the bitter taste grounding me. I was not going to make that call. I was going to let them feel powerful for exactly 24 more hours before I ripped the rug out from under their entire existence. The heavy glass door to my office suddenly flew open, slamming against the rubber wall stop with a violent crack. My business partner, Jasmine, marched directly into the quiet room now. She was usually the epitome of unshakable grace, a brilliant architect who handled high-pressure negotiations with a terrifying level of calm. Today, however, her dark eyes were wide with sheer panic, and her chest heaved as she struggled to catch her breath. She did not even bother saying good morning to me. She marched directly to my desk and slammed a thick stack of manila folders onto the polished wood. The bold red stamp across the top page was impossible to miss. It was an official city-issued stop work order. I looked down at the devastating document quietly. My face remained completely impassive, though a cold spark of anticipation ignited in my chest. Connor had actually done it. He had made good on Jada's pathetic threat. He had pulled the trigger. Kendra, we have a massive, catastrophic problem, Jasmine gasped, leaning her hands heavily on the edge of my desk. I just got off the phone with the primary contractor at the Midtown site. The City Zoning Commission sent an inspector at 7 o'clock this morning. They completely shut down the entire boutique hotel project. Jasmine was frantically pacing the floor right now, looking completely terrified and lost. Her heels clicked rapidly against the hardwood. They cited a sudden, unexplained historical preservation review and an arbitrary environmental audit. They revoked our excavation permits indefinitely. Do you have any idea what this means for us? If we do not break ground by the end of this month, our bridge loans go into default. We are looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in carrying costs every single week. We stand to lose millions if this gets tied up in municipal red tape. They are bleeding us dry before we even pour the foundation. I remained perfectly still, listening carefully. I let her vent the necessary panic. I slowly closed the manila folder and pushed it to the side of my desk, treating the devastating legal document like a mildly annoying piece of junk mail. I know exactly what it means, Jasmine. I said, my voice smooth and dangerously quiet. I know exactly who ordered the inspection, and I know exactly why they did it. Jasmine stopped pacing and stared at me, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. How could you possibly know that? The city planner I spoke to said the order came down immediately from the upper offices. It came directly from Councilman Roberts. We do not even know Councilman Roberts. We have never had a single dealing with his office. I smiled a thin, humorless expression. We do not know him, I replied. But my brother-in-law, Connor, knows him very intimately. Roberts is Connor uncle. This is not a random municipal audit. This is a highly calculated, targeted family hit. I watched the shock register on Jasmine's face as she slowly processed the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. She knew the toxic history of my intensely, deeply dysfunctional and manipulative family structure very well indeed. She knew about the wedding they abandoned and the relentless financial demands they placed on my shoulders. You are telling me, Jasmine whispered, her voice laced with absolute disgust, that your own sister just authorized a political hit on our flagship development to extort you for a personal bailout. I nodded slowly. That is exactly what I am telling you. Jasmine immediately pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers flying across the screen. I am calling our legal team right now, she declared fiercely. We are going to file an emergency injunction against the city council this very afternoon. We are going to drag the zoning commission into a public courtroom and expose this entire corrupt arrangement. We will fight them on every single permit. Put the phone away, Jasmine. I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. We are not calling the lawyers. We are not filing an injunction, and we are certainly not fighting Connor on the zoning permits. Jasmine stared at me as if I had completely lost my mind. Kendra, we cannot just sit here and do nothing. We are hemorrhaging cash by the hour right now while they laugh at us entirely. If we do not fight this, the hotel project is completely dead. I stood up from my chair, adjusting the cuffs of my suit jacket. We are not going to do nothing, I clarified, walking slowly around the desk. But we are not going to fight his battle on his chosen battlefield. If we challenge the city council, we will be tied up in litigation for 18 months. We will bleed out exactly like he planned. Connor wants us to play defense. He wants us panicking and scrambling to save our own expensive assets today while he watches from afar. I walked past Jasmine and headed straight for the large, abstract painting hanging on the far wall of my office. I am not going to play defense, I stated, reaching behind the heavy canvas and pressing my thumb against the hidden biometric scanner. A soft mechanical click echoed through the room as the steel door of my wall safe unlatched and swung open. If Connor wants to play dirty with my business, I am going to completely and ruthlessly obliterate his. I reached into the dark metal cavity of the heavy industrial steel wall safe, keeping my movements extremely calm. It did not hold stacks of cash or emergency jewelry. It held absolute maximum leverage. It held the meticulously gathered ammunition of a woman who had spent a decade preparing for the inevitable moment her toxic family tried to destroy her. I bypassed the folders containing my personal estate planning and pulled out a single thick black leather portfolio. I walked back to my desk and dropped the black portfolio directly on top of the stop work order. I flipped it open, revealing a stack of heavily notarized, highly confidential, and secure real estate transfer documents resting perfectly inside it. Jasmine stepped closer, her dark eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dropping to a curious whisper. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the top page. This is the commercial deed to a massive 40,000 square foot premium office building located right in the heart of the downtown tech district, I explained. It was quietly acquired 2 weeks ago by a faceless corporate holding company registered out of state. It is the exact building where Connor's supposedly revolutionary software startup currently leases its entire top-floor corporate office space as their primary headquarters. Jasmine's eyes widened as the pieces began to rapidly snap together in her intelligent mind. "Wait," she breathed, looking from the heavily verified document to my face. "Are you telling me what I think you are telling me?" I smiled, a genuine predatory expression. "I am telling you that I am Connor, new landlord." I turned the next page of the thick portfolio, revealing a brightly highlighted financial ledger. And according to these highly accurate verified accounting records, Connor Company is currently 3 full months delinquent on their extremely expensive commercial lease agreement today, without making a single late payment. He owes his new landlords over $100,000 in back rent and accumulating penalty fees. He has been entirely ignoring the consecutive default notices, completely assuming that the massive anonymous corporate entity that just purchased the property would not notice or simply would not care about one struggling tech bro missing a few monthly payments. He thinks he holds a loaded gun to my head, but he just handed me the exact justification I needed to completely ruin them. Tomorrow morning, I am going to execute a brutal lockout and seize absolutely everything Connor owns without any hesitation. Jasmine stared at the heavily notarized commercial deed resting on my mahogany desk, her intelligent eyes darting rapidly across the dense legal text. The realization washed over her face, replacing the absolute panic with a sharp, highly calculated focus. "You bought his building," she breathed, running a hand through her sleek, dark hair. "You are the faceless corporate holding company he has been completely ignoring for 3 months." I nodded smoothly, tapping my pen against the polished wood surface. Connor assumes that massive, out-of-state commercial landlords are slow and bureaucratic. He thinks he can hide behind endless automated warning letters and automated phone calls while he begs my family for a cash bailout. He completely relies on the assumption that an eviction takes months of tedious legal wrangling. He has absolutely no idea how aggressively a boutique real estate firm can move when the owner takes a deeply personal interest in a delinquent tenant. Jasmine straightened her posture, a dangerous, highly predatory smile matching my own. "He just tied up our boutique hotel permits out of pure spite," she said, her voice dropping to a low, fierce whisper. "What is our immediate countermeasure?" "We do not send a warning," I stated firmly, standing up and walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the busy Atlanta streets. "I am initiating an aggressive, expedited commercial legal eviction process for his entire top-floor office space immediately. We are not giving him a 30-day cure period. His previous landlord already exhausted the standard grace periods before selling the property to my holding company. I inherited a tenant who is in hard material default. I want the final lockout notice drafted, stamped by a judge, and ready for immediate execution by tomorrow morning." Jasmine immediately pulled out a legal pad, her pen flying across the paper. "I will call our lead commercial litigator right now. We can secure an emergency commercial eviction order given the sheer volume of his outstanding arrears and his total failure to respond to previous notices. But Kendra..." She paused, looking up with a strategic gleam in her eye. "Simply locking the doors over the weekend will not inflict the maximum amount of damage. We need absolute precision." I turned back from the window, my mind already 10 steps ahead of Connor, pathetic political maneuvering. "I know exactly when to strike," I replied, my tone completely devoid of mercy. Through my industry contacts, I know that Connor is hosting a desperate make-or-break pitch meeting tomorrow at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He has managed to corner 3 prominent venture capitalists from Silicon Valley. They are flying in specifically to tour his supposedly thriving headquarters and review his software platform. He needs their capital injection to keep his bloated vanity project alive. Jasmine let out a low, appreciative whistle. If those venture capitalists see that he cannot even cover his basic operational overhead, they will completely run for the hills. "Exactly," I said, sitting back down in my leather executive chair. "I want you to coordinate directly with our legal team and our private process server. I want that heavy steel lock-out chain placed on his double-glass corporate doors at exactly 2:15. I want the armed process server to walk right into his high-end glass conference room right in the middle of his desperate slide presentation and hand him the formal eviction papers. I want him absolutely publicly humiliated in front of the very people he is trying to con." The following 24 hours were a masterclass in aggressive corporate warfare. Trevon and I worked late into the night alongside Jasmine and our brutal legal team. We bypassed every standard bureaucratic delay, utilizing our premium industry connections to fast-track the eviction order through the county commercial courts. By 10 o'clock the next morning, A highly intimidating private process server named Marcus was sitting in our lobby holding a thick manila envelope containing the absolute destruction of Connor Tech startup. I briefed Marcus personally, handing him the detailed floor plans of Connor office suite. "You wait until precisely 2:15, I instructed him, tapping the exact location of the main glass conference room on the printed map. "You do not stop at the reception desk. You do not wait for his assistant to announce you. You walk directly into that meeting room, you loudly declare his delinquent status, and you hand him this document. My private security team will be waiting in the main corridor to immediately change the heavy digital locks on the suite doors the second you step out." Marcus nodded, his expression completely stoic and professional. "It will be handled with absolute precision, Ms. Wilson." At 1:45 that afternoon, I sat in my quiet office staring at the large digital clock glowing on my wall. Trayvon stood behind me, resting his strong, warm hands on my shoulders, offering a silent anchor of unwavering support. My phone sat face up on the desk, the screen dark and waiting. The tension in the room was incredibly thick, humming with the impending electrical charge of a massive storm about to break. 2:00 arrived. I pictured Connor standing in his expensive tailored suit, flashing his arrogant, entitled smile at the wealthy venture capitalists. I pictured him pointing to his fabricated revenue projections, lying through his teeth about his massive impending market growth. I pictured him feeling entirely invincible, believing his corrupt uncle had successfully paralyzed my hotel project and secured his dominance over our family dynamic. The red digital numbers on my clock slowly ticked over to 2:15. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath. It was done. Less than 20 minutes later, my private security chief texted my secure business line. The message was incredibly brief and highly satisfying. Execution flawless. Target was served directly in front of 3 principal investors. The investors immediately walked out of the building. The glass suite doors are fully chained and the digital keycards have been permanently deactivated. The premises are secure. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Trayvon squeezed my shoulders, chuckling softly in the quiet room. "You just surgically removed his entire spine," he murmured, leaning down to kiss the top of my head. "The venture capitalists will blacklist him completely. The word will spread through the tech sector by tomorrow morning that his company is insolvent and facing active commercial eviction. His revolutionary platform is completely dead in the water." I did not even have the chance to respond before my cell phone suddenly violently vibrated against the polished mahogany desk. The bright screen illuminated, flashing a name I had not seen on caller identification in nearly a year. Connor. I let it ring 3 times, listening to the aggressive, demanding vibration buzzing against the wood. I took a slow sip of my water, ensuring my throat was clear and my composure was absolute. I swiped the screen and lifted the phone to my ear, remaining completely silent. "You miserable, psychotic witch!" Connor screamed, his voice completely unhinged, cracking with sheer hysterical panic and uncontrollable rage. His words tumbled out in a frantic, chaotic rush. "You bought the building. You are the faceless holding company. How did you even do this? Do you have any idea what you just did to me, Kendra? You completely ruined my life." I sat perfectly still, listening to the beautiful, melodic sound of his absolute destruction. His usual arrogant, smug tone was entirely gone, replaced by the frantic, terrified whining of a man who had just lost everything. "I warned you, Connor," I replied, my voice dropping to a smooth, icy whisper. "I looked you directly in the eye in my mother living room, and I told you that I do not fund bad investments. You thought you could hold my boutique hotel hostage. You thought you could use your corrupt uncle to bleed my firm dry. You brought a rusty knife to an absolute gunfight. You are going to fix this right now," he bellowed, the sound of heavy street traffic echoing through the phone, indicating he was currently standing on the sidewalk, locked out of his own headquarters. "You are going to call your security thugs off and open those doors." I had the venture capitalists eating out of the palm of my hand. They were about to write a check for $3 million. "You just killed a massive tech acquisition. I will sue you for everything you own." "You cannot afford to sue me, Connor," I stated calmly, leaning back in my executive chair. You cannot even afford to pay your basic commercial rent. You are legally evicted. Your servers, your expensive ergonomic chairs, your computers, and every single piece of hardware inside that suite now belongs to me to cover your massive outstanding debts. You are completely finished." He let out a ragged, desperate gasp, struggling to pull air into his lungs. "You are evil," he spat, venom dripping from every single syllable. "You are deliberately destroying this family. I am calling Desmond and Brenda right now. I am telling them exactly what you just did. They are going to absolutely ruin you, Kendra. They will disown you completely. You will be dead to this family." I smiled, staring out the window at the bright blue Atlanta sky. "You are a little late for that threat, Connor," I murmured softly. "I was dead to this family the absolute second you forced them to abandon me on my wedding day. Run to Brenda. Run to Desmond. Cry to them about how the mean older sister took away your toys." I pulled the phone away from my ear, ignoring his frantic, high-pitched screaming, and calmly pressed the red end call button. The line went completely dead, leaving a beautiful, ringing silence in my quiet corner office. I set the phone face down on the desk and let out a long, slow breath. Connor was going to run crying to my parents. He was going to weaponize his failure and paint me as the ultimate vicious villain. My mother would undoubtedly become utterly hysterical, and my father would rage against my absolute defiance. They would gather together in their pristine suburban house, stoking the fires of their collective victimhood, completely convinced that I was a rogue, malicious force that needed to be aggressively put down. I picked up my heavy silver pen and tapped it thoughtfully against my clean desk blotter. I was perfectly intimately aware of my parents' social calendar. They were currently preparing to host their massive annual charity gala this upcoming weekend. It was the most important social event of their entire year. A lavish, extravagant party designed specifically to showcase their immense wealth, their pristine family image, and their unshakable social dominance to the entire Atlanta elite. Brenda had spent 6 long months meticulously planning every single minor detail, ensuring the floral arrangements, the catered menu, and the guest list were absolutely flawless. It was the one night a year where their carefully constructed facade of perfection was put on full glittering display for the cameras and the wealthy donors. They needed that gala to prove their superiority. They thought my retaliation was over. They thought locking Connor out of his office was the final extent of my brutal revenge. They had absolutely no idea that the eviction was simply the opening act. The stage for the ultimate final confrontation was now officially completely set, and I was going to burn their precious facade straight to the ground. This will mark my total and unyielding triumph. Let the absolute games begin right now. End. The silence in my office lasted exactly 4 hours before the calculated family machinery geared up for absolute war. I spent the remainder of Friday afternoon finalizing the new security protocols for the downtown office building and reviewing the updated architectural rendering for my boutique hotel with Jasmine. We were moving forward. Connor was officially in our rearview mirror. But as the sun began to dip below the Atlanta skyline, casting long, dramatic shadows across the polished hardwood floor, my personal cell phone illuminated with the first incoming strike. It was not a text from my mother. Brenda was far too cunning to leave a direct digital paper trail of her initial hostility. Instead, she deployed her favorite weapon. She weaponized the extended family network. My mother operated like a seasoned political operative, running a highly toxic smear campaign. She immediately hit the phones, calling every aunt, uncle, and cousin in our expansive directory. I could easily picture her pacing the length of her pristine suburban kitchen, clutching a glass of expensive Chardonnay, crying calculated theatrical tears. She was spinning a masterful narrative of absolute victimhood, where Jada and Connor were the innocent, hardworking victims, and I was the ruthless, cold-blooded monster. The story she fed them was completely detached from reality. According to Brenda, I was acting out of petty spite over a minor scheduling conflict at my wedding. She conveniently omitted the fact that Connor had actively sabotaged my multi-million-dollar commercial development through corrupt political channels. She completely erased his staggering financial delinquency. In my mother-fabricated universe, Connor was a brilliant tech innovator who just needed a tiny bridge loan, and I had maliciously bought his building simply to bankrupt him out of pure, vindictive jealousy. Brenda painted Jada as a weeping, desperate mother trying to save her family from my tyrannical corporate overreach. She knew exactly which emotional buttons to push to rally the troops. The results of her frantic phone tree manifested by early evening. My phone began to vibrate, continuously dancing across my marble kitchen counter at home. Traven watched quietly as I picked up the device and scrolled through the incoming barrage of familial outrage. Aunt Patricia sent a massive block of text calling me a complete disgrace to the family name. She accused me of forgetting my roots and abandoning basic Christian charity. Uncle Marcus left a heavily disappointed voice message, stating that punishing my sister for a simple wedding misunderstanding was unforgivably petty. Cousin Denise, an aspiring influencer who heavily relied on my parents for social access, texted me a single vomiting emoji followed by a paragraph about how money had turned me into a heartless corporate machine. Message after message poured in, creating a digital avalanche of sheer, unadulterated condemnation. They called me unforgiving. They called me vicious. They demanded I remember that blood is thicker than water, completely ignoring the fact that this specific bloodline had been heavily drowning me for over 3 decades. My family operated entirely like a cult. Brenda set the emotional temperature, and everyone else obediently fell perfectly in line to avoid becoming her next target. Not a single relative bothered to ask for my side of the story. Not one person questioned why a supposedly successful tech founder was facing active commercial eviction. They simply swallowed the narrative that protected the golden child and vilified the independent black sheep. I sat on a velvet bar stool in my kitchen, reading the toxic messages aloud to Trayvon. He shook his head, leaning against the stainless steel refrigerator, his arms crossed over his chest. He did not offer empty platitudes or tell me to ignore them. Trayvon understood the distinct, specific pain of watching your entire bloodline turn against you based on a complete fabrication. He simply poured me a glass of sparkling water and kissed my temple. "They are proving exactly who they are," he murmured softly. "Let them talk, Kendra. Their loud opinions do not pay your commercial mortgages, and their blind loyalty to Brenda will not save Connor from bankruptcy." I took a slow sip of the cold water, feeling a profound sense of absolute detachment. A year ago, this coordinated social assault would have shattered me. I would have drafted a dozen desperate defensive text messages, trying to explain my side, trying to beg for their understanding. Tonight, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical satisfaction. Their unified attack merely confirmed that I was making the exact right strategic moves. I placed the phone face down on the counter and walked away, refusing to respond to a single accusation. By Saturday morning, the smear campaign had aggressively escalated beyond the boundaries of our immediate blood relatives. Brenda and Desmond had weaponized their country club connections. The false narrative began spreading rapidly through our affluent social circles. I received a highly uncomfortable phone call from a prominent local charity board member inquiring if the nasty rumors about my aggressive business tactics were true. He mentioned that Desmond had been discussing my supposed corporate ruthlessness during a golf tournament. They were actively trying to poison my professional reputation in Atlanta. They honestly believed that if they made me a social pariah, I would immediately fold under the immense pressure and hand Connor the keys to his office back. The sheer unadulterated audacity of their strategy was breathtaking. They were attempting to socially bankrupt a woman who literally owned the concrete and steel infrastructure of their business community. They thought their country club gossip held more weight than my ironclad commercial leases. I spent the morning at my desk reviewing the updated financial projections for the Midtown Hotel project, completely ignoring the buzzing phone. The zoning commission, having realized that Connor Uncle could no longer protect them, had suddenly quietly reinstated my excavation permits. The political roadblock was entirely gone. My business was thriving while my family desperately tried to sink my ship with cheap social torpedoes. At exactly noon, my phone rang, displaying my father's contact information. Desmond rarely called me directly. He preferred to let Brenda handle the emotional manipulation while he swooped in to deliver the final authoritative commands. I let the call go directly to voicemail. I wanted his exact words permanently recorded. I wanted the digital receipt of his absolute arrogance. 5 minutes later, a new voicemail notification appeared on my screen. I sat in the quiet of my home office, sunlight streaming through the plantation shutters, and pressed play. The audio was crisp and clear, capturing the heavy, commanding resonance of my father's voice. He did not bother with a greeting. He spoke with the chilling, terrifying authority of a man who believed he owned my absolute compliance. "Kendra, this entire ridiculous charade ends today," Desmond dictated, his tone vibrating with barely suppressed fury. "I have spoken to Connor. I know exactly what you did to his office space. Your behavior is entirely unacceptable and a severe embarrassment to me. You will contact your legal team immediately and drop this absurd eviction process. You will unlock those doors by 3 o'clock this afternoon. Furthermore, you will wire the requested $150,000 into Connor business account to cover the damages your little stunt caused his venture capital negotiations." I listened to the message, my face a mask of pure ice. He was not asking, he was commanding. He honestly believed he possessed the authority to reverse a legal commercial eviction with a simple angry phone call. He paused, taking a heavy breath before delivering his final devastating ultimatum. "Your mother and I are hosting the annual foundation gala this coming weekend." Desmond continued, his voice dropping into a dark, menacing register. "The entire city elite will be present. You will attend this gala. You will walk up to Connor and Jada in front of our guests, and you will offer them a complete, unconditional apology. If you fail to follow these exact instructions, Kendra, I will take the microphone during the keynote address, and I will publicly disown you in front of every major player in Atlanta. I will ensure everyone in this city knows exactly how you treat your own blood. You will be completely ruined. Fix this now, or you are no longer my daughter." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I sat in the absolute silence of my office, the threat hanging heavily in the air. Desmond had laid all his cards on the table. He was holding my family membership hostage, betting my entire social standing against my business empire. He expected me to cower in fear at the prospect of being publicly disowned at the biggest society event of the season. He expected me to rush to the bank, tear up the eviction notices, and grovel for his forgiveness to maintain my place in his pristine family photograph. A slow, dark smile curled the edges of my lips. I reached forward and saved the voice message to a secure encrypted folder on my desktop. Desmond thought he was setting a brilliant trap. He thought the upcoming charity gala was his ultimate weapon to force my total submission. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed me the perfect, magnificent stage for my final act. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted a grand, dramatic performance in front of the entire Atlanta elite. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to attend that lavish, glittering gala in my finest couture gown, and I was going to deliver a performance they would remember for the rest of their miserable lives. The war had moved from the boardroom to the ballroom, and I was holding the absolute winning hand. I sat in the profound silence of my office, the echo of my father, heavy, authoritative voice fading into the corners of the room. He actually believed he had won. He actually believed that a single threatening voicemail could completely undo a perfectly executed corporate eviction and force me to hand over a massive sum of my own hard-earned cash. I reached across the smooth mahogany surface of my desk and picked up my cell phone. My thumb hovered over his contact name for a fraction of a second before I pressed call. I did not need to wait and strategize. I knew exactly how to play this hand. The phone rang twice before Desmond answered. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing. "It took you exactly 12 minutes to return my call, Kendra," he stated, his tone dripping with sheer, arrogant satisfaction. "I assume you have already contacted your lawyers to call off those security thugs at Connor Building." I could hear the faint clinking of crystal glasses in the background. He was at home, and I knew with absolute certainty that he had me on speakerphone. Brenda was sitting right beside him, hanging on his every word, waiting to hear my spirit finally break. "I have not called my legal team, Desmond," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "I called you because I needed to hear you repeat this completely absurd demand in real time. You want me to reverse a legal commercial lockout for a tenant who is 3 months delinquent on rent. You want me to hand over $150,000 of my own corporate capital to subsidize a failing venture. And you want me to do all of this to protect the feelings of a man who just tried to actively sabotage my flagship hotel development. He is family, Kendra. My mother." Brenda interjected, her voice sharp and brittle, cutting through the speakerphone. "Connor is your brother-in-law. He is Jada's husband. Family protects family. You do not buy your sister livelihood out from under her just to satisfy your own vindictive corporate ego. You are acting like a complete monster." My corporate ego. I repeated the words, tasting bitter on my tongue. He tried to freeze my zoning permits, Brenda. He tried to leverage his corrupt uncle on the city council to bleed my firm dry. He initiated the attack. I simply responded by enforcing a legally binding commercial lease that he willfully ignored for 90 days. He brought this entirely upon himself. "That does not give you the right to destroy them." Desmond snapped, his heavy baritone drowning out my breathless outrage. "You are punishing your sister because you are bitter about a minor scheduling conflict at your wedding. It is petty and it is beneath you." Connor had a massive deal on the table today. He was securing venture capital that would have set them up for life. "You ruined it intentionally." "I ruined a fraudulent pitch meeting," I corrected him smoothly. "Connor was lying to those investors. He is bankrupt. His company is a hollow shell and he is drowning in debt. I did not ruin him. I just exposed the reality of his profound incompetence." There was a heavy, loaded pause on the other end of the line. The silence stretched out as my parents quickly processed the absolute lack of fear in my voice. They were so accustomed to my immediate compliance that my continued defiance was short-circuiting their usual manipulation tactics. "Listen to me very carefully, Kendra," Desmond said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register that used to terrify me when I was a child. "We do not care about commercial leases or corporate policies. We care about the survival of this family structure. Connor needs this business to work. Jada needs this business to work. We have poured too much of our own retirement money into keeping them afloat, and we are not going to let you sink them out of pure spite." "So you expect me to set myself on fire to keep Jada warm?" I asked, the sheer absurdity of their logic finally pushing me to confront the core issue. "You expect me to drain my own accounts and compromise my own firm just to shield her from the consequences of marrying a complete failure? Why is she entitled to my money, Desmond? Why is she entitled to my protection?" "Because Jada is delicate," Desmond stated explicitly, the words hitting the air like a physical blow. "She needs us to survive. She has always needed us. You have always been tough, aggressive, and independent. You do not need this money, Kendra. She does." The words hung in the quiet atmosphere of my office, ringing with a devastating, terrible clarity. "You have always been tough. You have always been independent. You do not need this money. She does." In that singular, profound moment, the last remaining invisible thread tethering me to my family completely severed. A massive psychological wave crashed over me, washing away 34 years of intense, desperate longing for their approval. I finally completely understood the entirely toxic dynamic that had governed my entire existence. I had spent my whole life working twice as hard as Jada, trying to earn a fraction of the praise they freely showered upon her. I had built a successful real estate empire from the ground up, while she bounced from one expensive hobby to another. I thought my independence and my fierce work ethic would eventually win their respect. I thought if I just became successful enough, reliable enough, brilliant enough, they would finally look at me with the same deep, unconditional love they reserved exclusively for my younger sister. But I was entirely wrong. They never respected my hard work. They never celebrated my independence. They only ever viewed my success as a convenient excuse to completely neglect me. My toughness was not a badge of honor in their eyes. It was a free pass for them to ignore my emotional needs. My financial stability was not a point of pride. It was simply a secondary bank account. They felt fully entitled to raid whenever Jada failed. They had categorized us decades ago. Jada was the fragile, beautiful flower that required constant watering, shielding, and endless financial sunlight. I was the sturdy, unkillable weed that could be ignored, trampled upon, and expected to survive without a single drop of care. They did not love Jada more because she was better. They loved her more because her constant, endless failures made them feel powerful and necessary. My total independence made them feel entirely useless, so they punished me for it. They weaponized my own strength against me, using it as the sole justification to strip away my resources and hand them directly to my sister. I stood absolutely frozen behind my desk, the heavy realization fundamentally rewriting my entire understanding of my own life. I was not the villain in this story. I was the designated sacrificial lamb. And they were perfectly willing to slaughter my business, my livelihood, and my reputation just to keep their fragile golden child from facing reality. Kendra Desmond barked, his voice shattering my internal revelation. Did you hear me? You will undo this eviction. You will wire that money. You will stop this aggressive behavior right now. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, measured breath. The blinding red-hot rage that had been boiling in my chest suddenly, instantly evaporated. It was completely replaced by a freezing, absolute glacial calm. I no longer wanted them to understand me. I no longer wanted to reason with them. You cannot negotiate with people who view your very existence purely as a resource to be consumed. I opened my eyes, looking at the Atlanta skyline. I forced my vocal cords to relax. I modulated my tone, smoothing out the sharp edges of my anger until my voice sounded defeated, compliant, and completely crushed. I channeled 30 years of forced submission into my next words. I hear you, Desmond, I said softly, letting a manufactured tremor of exhaustion slip into my voice. I hear everything you are saying. I heard Brenda let out a sharp, audible breath of relief in the background. She thought she had won. She thought the old, compliant Kendra had finally resurfaced under the heavy pressure of their combined authority. So you will drop the eviction, Desmond demanded, pressing his apparent advantage. You will wire the money to Connor. I kept my voice dead calm, injecting just the right amount of hesitant surrender. I cannot reverse the eviction over the phone today, Desmond, I explained, adopting a tone of logistical defeat. The courts are closing and the building managers have already processed the locks, and transferring $150,000 requires corporate authorization forms that I cannot physically execute until Monday morning. That is unacceptable, Brenda snapped immediately, moving in for the kill. You fix this before the gala tomorrow night, Kendra. We are not going to have you walking around our charity dinner while your sister is crying at home. I will fix it, I promised, my voice incredibly soft, incredibly compliant. I will come to the charity gala tomorrow night. I will bring the building deed and all the necessary financial paperwork with me. I will bring the transfer authorizations for Connor. We can sit down in your private study during the dinner, and I will sign everything over. I will settle the family debt once and for all. The absolute silence on the line was thick with their triumphant satisfaction. They honestly, completely believed they had just successfully broken my spirit. They believed their threat of public disownment had terrified me into total submission. They pictured me arriving at their glittering society event, clutching my corporate documents, ready to grovel at Jada feet and hand over my multi-million-dollar commercial property just to stay in the family photo album. See that you do, Desmond said, his voice radiating smug, unadulterated victory. Dress appropriately, Kendra. There will be photographers. We expect you to arrive at 7 o'clock sharp. Do not disappoint us again. I will not disappoint you, Desmond, I replied, staring directly at the thick black portfolio resting on my desk. I will give you exactly what you deserve. I hung up the phone, cutting off the connection. I slowly lowered the device to the polished wood surface. A genuine, chilling smile spread across my face, reaching all the way to my eyes. They thought I was bringing the deed to surrender it. They thought I was bringing the financial paperwork to bail them out. They thought I was coming to their precious charity gala to bleed for the golden child one last time. They were completely profoundly wrong. They had demanded a public spectacle. They had threatened to disown me in front of the entire Atlanta elite. They had set the stage for their own absolute destruction. I was not bringing a peace offering to their lavish party. I was bringing a highly verified, meticulously documented financial guillotine, and I was going to execute it flawlessly in front of every single person they were trying to impress. The tires of Trayvon's sleek black Aston Martin crunched softly against the crushed white gravel of the Oakwood Country Club's grand circular driveway. Valets in crisp white jackets rushed forward to open our doors, perfectly synchronized. The humid Georgia air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, blooming magnolias, and burning money. I stepped out, smoothing the skirt of my emerald green Tom Ford gown. It fit like a second skin, acting as my immaculate armored shell. Trayvon rounded the car effortlessly, adjusting his perfectly tailored charcoal tuxedo jacket. His dark eyes met mine over the roof, communicating absolute, unwavering solidarity. He offered his arm, and I took it, feeling the solid, reassuring muscle beneath the fine wool. We walked slowly up the sweeping marble staircase toward the massive double doors of the historic clubhouse. This was the epicenter of Atlanta's old money elite. This was a highly exclusive place where multi-million-dollar political deals were quietly forged over watered-down martinis and whispered country club gossip in the men's locker room. Tonight, however, it was serving as the glorious, glittering stage for my parents' massive annual foundation gala. The entire event was a masterclass in performative false philanthropy. They actively raised money for underprivileged youth programs while simultaneously spending a small fortune on imported beluga caviar ice sculptures and champagne just to ensure their names remained firmly at the absolute top of the city's social register. The sheer hypocrisy of the event used to make me sick to my stomach. Tonight, it merely fueled the cold, steady, unyielding fire burning in my veins. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, and the overwhelming wave of classical music, clinking crystal glasses, and loud manufactured laughter washed over us as we entered the grand foyer. We stepped into the sprawling main ballroom, and I took a moment to survey the battlefield. The space was dripping in obscene wealth. Massive chandeliers dripping with Swarovski crystals cast a glow over the sea of silk taffeta and custom tuxedos. Waiters in uniforms glided effortlessly through the dense crowd, balancing heavy silver trays loaded with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. In the center of the room, holding court like a reigning monarch, was my mother. Brenda wore an Oscar de la Renta gown that caught the chandelier light with every calculated movement she made. She was surrounded by the wives of state senators, real estate developers, and local media moguls. She threw her head back, laughing a fake laugh at something a federal judge's wife had just said. She was playing the perfect, benevolent matriarch to perfection. She was the generous philanthropist, the mother, the pillar of the local community. Watching her operate the room was like watching a venomous snake slide through tall summer grass. She was in her element, unaware that the ground beneath her designer heels was about to collapse. A few yards away, my father Desmond was deep in conversation with a group of venture capitalists holding a glass of aged bourbon, projecting the image of the stoic patriarch. My gaze swept past the ice sculptures and the seafood buffet, finally landing on the targets of tonight's operation. Connor and Jada were standing near the staircase, and they were acting smug. Jada was wearing a blush pink gown that must have cost more than a used car, her hair styled into an updo. She held a crystal champagne flute in one hand, gesturing wildly with the other as she spoke to a group of socialites. Connor stood beside her, his chest puffed out, an arrogant sneer plastered across his face. The sheer entitlement radiating from both of them was genuinely nauseating to witness. They were holding their drinks like royalty, basking in the manufactured artificial glow of my family's stolen prestige. They were completely convinced that they had successfully won this war. They honestly, deeply believed that Desmond's chilling, authoritative voicemail had successfully bullied me into total, unconditional submission. In their minds, I was walking through those grand doors right now, as a defeated, broken, compliant woman carrying a heavy black leather portfolio stuffed with their immediate financial salvation. They thought the aggressive commercial eviction I had initiated yesterday was already cancelled and fully reversed. They thought the massive, staggering debt they owed my real estate firm was about to be instantly, completely wiped clean. They looked at me as I entered the room, and Connor immediately nudged Jada, pointing his half-empty glass in my specific direction. Jada turned her eyes locking onto mine across the crowded room, and her lips curled into a victorious, deeply condescending smile. She actually had the sheer, unmitigated audacity to give me a small, mocking wave. I did not wave back. I simply held her gaze, my face an impenetrable mask of absolute, terrifying calm. Trayvon's grip tightened slightly on my arm, a silent physical signal of our shared strategic objective. "Let them enjoy their last few precious minutes of breathing room," he murmured softly, his deep voice barely audible over the swelling sound of the live string quartet playing in the corner. "They are about to learn a very hard lesson about gravity." As Trayvon and I began to slowly, carefully navigate through the dense, crowded ballroom, moving purposefully past the wealthy elite donors and the towering, extravagant floral arrangements, my mother finally spotted my arrival. I saw the immediate sharp flash of recognition in Brenda's dark eyes, followed instantly by a rapid, calculated shift in her entire physical demeanor. She excused herself from her captive circle of wealthy admirers with a practiced, highly graceful smile, but her eyes were cold hard and locked dead onto my face. She moved toward me through the crowd with the swift, aggressive determination of a starved predator closing in on its trapped, helpless prey. She intercepted us near the sprawling, silent auction tables, her silver sequined gown shimmering dangerously in the dim, ambient light. "Kendra, darling," she cooed, her voice pitched perfectly loud enough for the benefit of the eavesdropping wealthy guests standing nearby. "You made it. We were beginning to worry you might not show up." Before I could even offer a standard, polite greeting, her manicured hand shot out her sharp fingernails, digging painfully into the bare skin of my forearm. The warm, maternal public facade dropped instantly the very second she was close enough to speak without being directly overheard by the general public. Her voice dropped to a harsh, vicious, venomous whisper. "You have the portfolio." I nodded slowly, my expression completely blank and devoid of any readable emotion. "I brought exactly what Desmond demanded." Brenda let out a sharp, impatient, ragged breath of relief, her eyes darting nervously toward the surrounding crowd, ensuring nobody was watching our tense interaction. "Excellent. We are going to handle this right now, immediately before the first dinner course is served. I am not having you ruin this vital evening with your dramatic, lingering sulking. Follow me right now." She tightened her painful grip on my arm and attempted to aggressively, physically pull me away from the main ballroom floor. She was actively trying to steer me toward the narrow, dimly lit back corridor that led directly to the private VIP coat room and the secure staff offices. It was a classic textbook Brenda manipulation maneuver. Isolate the target from any support. Apply maximum psychological pressure in a confined, hidden space. Force the ultimate submission quietly behind locked, closed doors so the pristine, fake public image remains completely, totally untarnished. She desperately wanted me to sign over the commercial deed to Connor's office building and hand over the staggering $150,000 bailout check in the shadows, entirely out of sight of her precious country club friends. She wanted to erase her golden child's massive failures in a dark closet. I planted my expensive heels firmly into the plush hotel carpet, transforming my body into an immovable statue. I completely refused to move a single inch forward. My mother yanked my arm again, her fake smile straining heavily as a few nearby guests turned their heads to look at our sudden lack of forward momentum. "Kendra, stop making a public scene," she hissed violently through completely clenched teeth, her dark eyes flashing with genuine, unbridled fury at my sudden resistance. "Come into the private coat room right now, hand over the documents to Connor, and sign the wire transfers immediately. Desmond is waiting for us in the back office. Do not test my patience tonight." I slowly, deliberately reached over with my free hand and removed her clawing fingers from my arm. I peeled them back with deliberate, agonizing slowness. I looked directly into her furious, demanding, panicked eyes. My voice was a dead calm whisper that cut through the noise of the ballroom like a sharpened scalpel. No, I am not going anywhere, Brenda. If we are going to settle this family debt, we are going to do it right here in the light. Brenda's face contorted, a brief, horrifying flash of genuine panic cracking her pristine, Botox-smoothed facade. She opened her mouth to argue, to issue a quiet, venomous command, but I did not give her the opportunity to speak. I linked my arm firmly through Trayvon's and pivoted away from the dimly lit corridor that led to the coat rooms. I steered us directly toward the center of the grand ballroom, aiming straight for the primary VIP table. This table was a massive circular spectacle draped in gold-threaded linen, positioned strategically beneath the largest Swarovski crystal chandelier in the room. It was surrounded by Atlanta's most influential figures. Mayors, federal judges, and real estate tycoons sat shoulder to shoulder sipping vintage champagne and picking at imported caviar. This was my parents' throne. This was the exact stage they had built to showcase their fabricated family perfection. If they intended to strip me of my hard-earned commercial property and demand $150,000 of my corporate capital to subsidize Jada's spectacularly failing marriage, we were going to do it right here. We were going to conduct this transaction in full, unobstructed view of their wealthy country club friends and the remaining venture capitalist Connor had been desperately trying to court. Brenda had absolutely no choice but to follow us. To cause a physical altercation or scream after me would completely ruin the elegant philanthropic image she was currently projecting to the elite crowd. I could hear the sharp, furious click of her designer heels hitting the marble floor just inches behind me. She was seething, radiating a toxic, suffocating heat, but she plastered a rigid, terrifying smile onto her face as we approached the center of the room. Trayvon walked beside me with the relaxed, dangerous grace of a seasoned heavyweight fighter entering the ring. The warmth of his solid presence was a grounding anchor amidst the chaos. He pulled out my chair at the head table with effortless chivalry, settling into the seat beside me. The sudden, unscripted arrival of the estranged daughter sent a visible ripple of hushed whispers through the surrounding tables. Eyes darted rapidly in our direction. Crystal glasses paused halfway to glossed lips. The Atlanta elite possessed a supernatural instinct for sensing high society blood in the water. They knew the rumors. They knew the supposed scandal. They were waiting for the spectacular explosion. Desmond sat directly across from me. His heavy authoritative features tightened into a mask of pure, unadulterated warning. He gave me a sharp, microscopic nod, a silent command to execute my surrender quickly and quietly. To his immediate right sat Connor and Jada. They looked like the undisputed king and queen of a fragile, collapsing empire. Jada adjusted the bodice of her blush-pink couture gown, her eyes glittering with a malicious, triumphant joy. She truly believed her coordinated smear campaign had utterly destroyed my resolve. Beside her, Connor sat back in his gold-backed chair, swirling a glass of expensive scotch. He carried himself with the bloated, unearned arrogance of a man who believed his catastrophic business failures were magically cured because his wealthy in-laws had successfully bullied the family scapegoat into total submission. He looked at me with absolute contempt, completely convinced he had won the war. He believed my presence at this table was the ultimate white flag. He assumed I was broken, terrified of my father's threat of public disownment, and ready to hand over my commercial building to save my social standing in the community. The sheer blinding audacity of his confidence was almost mesmerizing to witness. He did not see a successful independent real estate developer sitting across from him. He only saw a bank account he felt entirely entitled to raid. He viewed my entire marriage, my agency, and my professional achievements as temporary obstacles that Desmond had easily swatted aside. The false victory radiated from his pores, thick and suffocating. The other guests at the VIP table leaned in, subtly pretending to engage in their own polite conversations, while actively hanging on every single movement we made. The venture capitalists sitting nearby exchanged calculating, interested glances. They had heard the country club gossip over the past 48 hours. They knew all about the supposed feud, the commercial eviction, and the fabricated narrative of my cold-blooded corporate greed. They were eagerly waiting for the grand climax of the drama. I kept my posture impeccably straight, resting my hands lightly on the table, projecting an aura of absolute unbreakable calm. I let the heavy silence stretch, forcing them to initiate the transaction. I was not going to make this easy for them. They had demanded a public spectacle, and I was going to ensure they received exactly what they had ordered. Connor finally broke the heavy silence. He set his scotch glass down onto the linen tablecloth with a heavy, deliberate thud. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, invading my personal space with his arrogant posture. He reached into the breast pocket of his custom-tailored tuxedo jacket and pulled out a heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc fountain pen. He held it between his fingers, twirling it with an exaggerated theatrical slowness. His eyes were bright with an ugly, unearned victory. He looked at me as if I were a disobedient subordinate finally returning to the fold after a failed rebellion. "Well, Kendra," Connor said, his voice carrying clearly over the soft melodic background music of the string quartet playing in the corner of the grand ballroom. He spoke loudly enough to ensure the surrounding socialites caught every single word of his speech. "I have to admit I am pleasantly surprised. I genuinely thought we were going to have to drag this out through the courts. But your father assured me you would eventually see reason and come back to reality." He smiled, a sharp, predatory baring of teeth. Jada giggled softly beside him, taking a delicate sip of her expensive champagne, her eyes dancing with sheer malicious delight. Brenda stood rigid behind Desmond's chair, her manicured hands gripping the wooden backrest so tightly her knuckles were stark white. She shot me a furious, desperate glare, silently screaming at me to produce the checkbook and end the public confrontation before it escalated into a complete disaster. She wanted the money transferred, the deed handed over, and my immediate departure from the venue. Connor slid the heavy gold pen across the pristine white linen tablecloth. It glided smoothly, coming to a dead stop exactly 1 inch from my emerald green silk clutch. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, projecting the ultimate image of a victorious, untouchable conqueror. The surrounding investors watched him closely, likely evaluating his supposed power within this prominent, wealthy family. He was putting on a masterful show for them, demonstrating his total dominance over the woman who had supposedly tried to ruin his entire technological enterprise. "Go ahead and sign the transfer authorizations, Kendra," Connor commanded, his tone dripping with thick, suffocating condescension. He let out a short, mocking laugh, looking around the table to invite the other wealthy guests into the inside joke. "I guess it took a little while, but I am glad to see you are finally learning how to follow family orders. Let us get this unfortunate little misunderstanding settled quickly today, so Jada and I can get back to running our multi-million-dollar company without any more of your dramatic interruptions." The sheer, staggering disrespect of his arrogant words hung heavily in the air. He was completely humiliating me in front of the city's most powerful figures, openly demanding my hard-earned money while aggressively mocking my independence and business acumen. Trayvon shifted slightly beside me, a low, dangerous rumble vibrating deep in his chest. His protective instincts were flaring rapidly, but I placed a gentle, restraining hand on his thigh under the table. I did not need rescuing. I had engineered this exact specific moment. I wanted his absolute arrogance on full public display before I dismantled his entire fraudulent existence piece by piece. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I did not reach for the gold-plated pen resting on the tablecloth. I maintained an expression of absolute freezing tranquility. The surrounding guests had gone completely silent, the nearby conversations dropping into hushed, eager whispers. Every single eye at the VIP table was locked onto my face, waiting for the inevitable, humiliating surrender they had been promised by Brenda and Desmond. The tension in the ballroom was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. The air was electric with anticipation. Instead of reaching for my checkbook, I slowly unclasped the gold latch of my designer bag. The metallic click echoed sharply in the sudden, tense quiet of our immediate circle. I reached inside and withdrew a thick, heavy manila folder. It was dense with meticulously gathered, highly verified legal documents. I lifted it from my bag and dropped it squarely onto the center of the table, right next to Connor's expensive pen. The folder hit the wood beneath the linen with a heavy, satisfying thud that made Jada jump slightly in her seat. Her triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a sudden flicker of uncertainty and dread. I folded my hands together, resting them gracefully on top of the manila envelope. I bypassed Connor entirely, shifting my gaze to lock eyes directly with my parents. Desmond's authoritative frown deepened into an expression of profound, sudden confusion. Brenda's rigid posture visibly faltered, a new, entirely unscripted terror bleeding into her dark eyes. They recognized instantly that this was not a simple commercial deed. This was not a standard corporate bailout check. This was something entirely different, something vast and heavily documented, that they could not immediately control. I kept my voice dead calm, pitching it perfectly so the surrounding wealthy friends and venture capitalists could hear every single syllable clearly over the music and the hushed murmurs of the crowd. "I brought the paperwork as promised," I stated, my tone slicing through the heavy, perfumed air of the ballroom like a polished steel blade. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the thick cover of the folder, letting the reality of the impending moment settle over the entire table. "But you might want to read the names on these bankruptcy filings before you pop the champagne." The heavy manila folder sat on the crisp white linen like an unexploded bomb. The string quartet in the corner of the grand ballroom continued to play a lively sonata, but the music seemed to fade into a hollow buzzing sound at our table. Desmond stared at the thick envelope, his jaw tight with barely suppressed outrage. He reached out with a heavy hand, completely expecting to find a standard commercial lease termination and perhaps a cashier check to cover Connor's supposed damages. He ripped the top flap open and pulled out the thick stack of bound paper. Connor sat back in his gold chair, maintaining his arrogant smirk, but a tiny bead of sweat suddenly materialized along his hairline. He thought he knew exactly what was in that envelope. He was profoundly mistaken. Desmond flipped to the first page. I watched his eyes scan the bold black text. It was not a lease agreement. It was a comprehensive, legally verified forensic financial audit of Connor Entire Technology startup. I had instructed Jasmine to run a deep background check on the company the moment Connor missed his second rent payment. She had utilized a specialized corporate investigative firm to trace every single dollar that flowed in and out of his corporate accounts over the past 2 years. The results were not just bad, they were catastrophically illegal. Desmond's brow furrowed deeply, the arrogant certainty melting from his face, replaced by a sudden chilling confusion. He flipped to the second page and then the third, his breathing growing shallow and rapid. "What is this?" Kendra Desmond demanded, his voice dropping into a harsh, raspy whisper. He did not look up from the pages. His eyes were darting back and forth across the meticulously highlighted columns of numbers. "This is not your commercial eviction notice. This is a complete corporate audit." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table, intertwining my fingers. I kept my voice perfectly modulated, ensuring it carried to the surrounding venture capitalists who were suddenly leaning in with intense, unvarnished curiosity. "That folder contains the exact reason Connor is facing immediate commercial eviction," I explained smoothly. "It also contains the reason his venture capital funding fell through yesterday. Investors do not typically hand over millions of dollars to a founder who is actively funneling corporate seed money into his personal lifestyle accounts." Connor's face drained of all color. The arrogant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. He lunged forward, reaching a shaking hand toward the stack of papers in my father's grasp. "Give me that," he hissed, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "You have absolutely no right to look through my private corporate financials. That is highly confidential information. You are violating federal privacy laws, Kendra." I blocked his hand with a swift, graceful motion. "Actually, Connor," I replied, my tone dripping with icy professional courtesy, "when you default on a commercial lease that mandates financial transparency clauses for the underlying corporate entity, all privacy protections are immediately null and void. You signed the lease. You granted my firm full legal access to review your operating capital. Jasmine simply did her job, and what she found is staggering. Jada let out a sharp, nervous laugh, glancing around the table at the silent, staring guests. She reached out and touched Connor's arm, trying to maintain the facade of the perfect, unbothered couple. "Oh, please, Kendra," she scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "You are just trying to embarrass us because you are jealous. Connor Company is just going through a standard restructuring phase. All tech startups experience temporary cash flow issues. It is completely normal in the industry. You just do not understand how high-level venture capital works because you just manage boring office buildings." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the rising panic she was desperately trying to hide behind her usual condescending attitude. I shifted my gaze to my sister, feeling absolutely zero pity for the absolute devastation I was about to unleash. Standard restructuring does not involve buying a brand new imported Range Rover with funds specifically earmarked for software development, I stated clearly. My voice echoed across the silent table, hitting the ears of the venture capitalists, who immediately sat up straight. Desmond flipped to the next section of the audit, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. I had Jasmine highlight the most egregious transactions in bright yellow ink. Connor has not been building a technology platform. He has been running a highly sophisticated embezzlement scheme, using his own startup as a personal slush fund to subsidize your lavish lifestyle. Brenda snatched the papers from Desmond, hands her manicured fingers trembling violently as she stared at the highlighted columns. I watched her read the itemized list of stolen corporate funds. $50,000 wired to a luxury travel agency in Milan for a 2-week vacation that was fraudulently logged as an international networking conference. $30,000 spent at a high-end boutique in Paris, categorized as corporate client gifting. $80,000 funneled into a shell account to cover the down payment on Jada's massive diamond anniversary ring. The numbers were undeniable. They were glaring, precise, and utterly damning. Connor had systematically drained his investor capital to buy designer bags, first-class plane tickets, and luxury vehicles they absolutely could not afford. He has been bleeding his own company dry for 18 months. I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating silence of the ballroom. He stopped paying his commercial rent to me because he completely drained his operating accounts to buy your silence, Jada. He bought you those custom red sole shoes and that designer luggage using stolen money. He is not a brilliant technology innovator. He is a common thief wearing a tailored tuxedo. He is completely bankrupt, and he is currently under active investigation by his remaining initial investors for severe financial fraud. The atmosphere at the VIP table plummeted into a profound, stunning silence. The surrounding guests, who had been eagerly eavesdropping on the escalating family drama, were now completely immobilized by the sheer magnitude of the scandal. This was not just a simple family dispute over a missed wedding or a minor commercial lease. This was a massive public unmasking of a colossal financial crime happening in the dead center of Atlanta's most exclusive charity event. The venture capitalists, who had been considering throwing Connor a lifeline, slowly put down their champagne flutes, their expressions turning to absolute disgust. Connor had tried to hustle them just hours ago. Now his entire fraudulent existence was laid completely bare. Brenda stared at the audit, her perfectly smooth face crumbling into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Her eyes darted from the highlighted embezzlement figures to Connor's pale, sweating face, and then to Jada's trembling hands. The entire foundation of her fabricated reality was disintegrating in real time. She had spent the last 2 years actively bragging to her wealthy country club friends about her brilliant, successful tech founder's son-in-law. She had relentlessly elevated Jada to the status of a high society queen based entirely on this fake wealth. She had deliberately skipped my wedding, the most important day of my life, specifically to coddle and protect this man. "You lied to us," Brenda whispered, her voice hoarse and unrecognizable. She dropped the papers onto the table as if they were physically burning her skin. She stared at Connor with a mixture of shock and sheer revulsion. "You sat in our living room and told us you just needed a minor bridge loan to cover a temporary banking error. You told us Kendra was acting out of pure spite. You asked us for our retirement funds to save a company you had already gutted from the inside out. Connor stammered aggressively, pulling at the collar of his tuxedo jacket, as if it were suddenly choking him. Brenda, you have to understand, he pleaded, his voice dropping into a desperate, whiny register. The market shifted. The development costs were higher than I anticipated. I had to maintain a certain image to attract the right tier of investors. Jada needed to look the part. We had to project success to attract success. It was all a calculated business strategy. I was going to pay the corporate accounts back as soon as the new funding round closed. It was just a temporary reallocation of resources. A temporary reallocation of resources, I repeated, shaking my head in pure amazement at his endless capacity for delusion. You stole $500,000 from your own investors to buy your wife shiny objects. That is not a business strategy, Connor. That is a federal crime. And you actually had the sheer audacity to think you could bully me into covering your tracks. You thought you could use my father to force me to hand over my own corporate capital to quietly save your skin. The heavy manila folder sat on the crisp, white linen like an unexploded bomb. The string quartet in the corner of the grand ballroom continued to play a lively sonata, but the delicate music seemed to fade into a hollow buzzing sound at our table. Desmond stared at the thick envelope, his jaw tight with barely suppressed outrage. He reached out with a heavy hand, completely expecting to find a standard commercial lease termination and perhaps a cashier's check to cover Connor's supposed damages. He ripped the top flap open and pulled out the thick stack of bound paper. Connor sat back in his gold chair, maintaining his arrogant smirk, but a tiny bead of sweat suddenly materialized along his hairline. He thought he knew exactly what was in that envelope. He was profoundly mistaken. Desmond flipped to the first page. I watched his eyes scan the bold, black text. It was not a lease agreement. It was a comprehensive, legally verified forensic financial audit of Connor's entire technology startup. I had instructed Jasmine to run a deep background check on the company the exact moment Connor missed his second rent payment. She had utilized a specialized corporate investigative firm to trace every single dollar that flowed in and out of his corporate accounts over the past 2 years. The results were not just bad. They were catastrophically illegal. Desmond's brow furrowed deeply. The arrogant certainty melted from his face, replaced by a sudden chilling confusion. He flipped to the second page and then the third, his breathing growing shallow and rapid. "What is this, Kendra?" Desmond demanded, his voice dropping into a harsh, raspy whisper. He did not look up from the pages. His eyes were darting back and forth across the meticulously highlighted columns of numbers. "This is not your commercial eviction notice. This is a complete corporate audit." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table, intertwining my fingers. I kept my voice perfectly modulated, ensuring it carried to the surrounding venture capitalists who were suddenly leaning in with intense, unvarnished curiosity. "That folder contains the exact reason Connor is facing immediate commercial eviction," I explained smoothly. "It also contains the precise reason his venture capital funding fell through yesterday afternoon. Institutional investors do not typically hand over millions of dollars to a founder who is actively funneling corporate seed money into his personal lifestyle accounts." Connor's face drained of all color. The arrogant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. He lunged forward, reaching a shaking hand toward the stack of papers in my father's grasp. "Give me that!" he hissed, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "You have absolutely no right to look through my private corporate financials. That is highly confidential information. You are violating federal privacy laws, Kendra." I blocked his hand with a swift, graceful motion. "Actually, Connor," I replied, my tone dripping with icy professional courtesy. "When you default on a commercial lease that mandates financial transparency clauses for the underlying corporate entity, all privacy protections are immediately null and void. You signed the lease. You granted my firm full legal access to review your operating capital. Jasmine simply did her job. And what she found is staggering." Jada let out a sharp, nervous laugh, glancing around the table at the silent, staring guests. She reached out and touched Connor's arm, trying to maintain the facade of the perfect, unbothered couple. "Oh, please, Kendra," she scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "You are just trying to embarrass us because you are jealous. Connor's company is just going through a standard restructuring phase. All tech startups experience temporary cash flow issues. It is completely normal in the industry. You just do not understand how high-level venture capital works because you just manage boring office buildings." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the rising panic she was desperately trying to hide behind her usual condescending attitude. I shifted my gaze to my sister, feeling absolutely zero pity for the absolute devastation I was about to unleash upon her. Standard restructuring does not involve buying a brand new imported Range Rover with funds specifically earmarked for software development, I stated clearly. My voice echoed across the silent table, hitting the ears of the venture capitalists, who immediately sat up straight. Desmond flipped to the next section of the audit, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. I had Jasmine highlight the most egregious transactions in bright yellow ink. Connor has not been building a technology platform. He has been running a highly sophisticated embezzlement scheme using his own startup as a personal slush fund to subsidize your lavish lifestyle. Brenda snatched the papers from Desmond's hands, her manicured fingers trembling violently as she stared at the highlighted columns. I watched her read the itemized list of stolen corporate funds. $50,000 wired to a luxury travel agency in Milan for a 2-week vacation that was fraudulently logged as an international networking conference. $30,000 spent at a high-end boutique in Paris, categorized as corporate client gifting. $80,000 funneled into a shell account to cover the down payment on Jada's massive diamond anniversary ring. The numbers were undeniable. They were glaring, precise, and utterly damning. Connor had systematically drained his investor capital to buy designer bags, first-class plane tickets, and luxury vehicles they absolutely could not afford. He has been bleeding his own company dry for 18 months. I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating silence of the ballroom. He stopped paying his commercial rent to me because he completely drained his operating accounts to buy your silence, Jada. He bought you those custom red sole shoes and that designer luggage using stolen money. He is not a brilliant technology innovator. He is a common thief wearing a tailored tuxedo. He is completely bankrupt, and he is currently under active investigation by his remaining initial investors for severe financial fraud. The atmosphere at the VIP table plummeted into a profound, stunning silence. The surrounding guests, who had been eagerly eavesdropping on the escalating family drama, were now completely immobilized by the sheer magnitude of the scandal. This was not just a simple family dispute over a missed wedding or a minor commercial lease. This was a massive public unmasking of a colossal financial crime happening in the dead center of Atlanta's most exclusive charity event. The venture capitalists, who had been considering throwing Connor a lifeline, slowly put down their champagne flutes, their expressions turning to absolute disgust. Connor had tried to hustle them just hours ago. Now his entire fraudulent existence was laid completely bare. Brenda stared at the audit, her perfectly smooth face crumbling into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Her eyes darted from the highlighted embezzlement figures to Connor's pale, sweating face, and then to Jada's trembling hands. The entire foundation of her fabricated reality was disintegrating in real time. She had spent the last 2 years actively bragging to her wealthy country club friends about her brilliant, successful tech founder son-in-law. She had relentlessly elevated Jada to the status of a high society queen based entirely on this fake wealth. She had deliberately skipped my wedding, the most important day of my life, specifically to coddle and protect this man. "You lied to us," Brenda whispered, her voice hoarse and unrecognizable. She dropped the papers onto the table as if they were physically burning her skin. She stared at Connor with a mixture of shock and sheer revulsion. "You sat in our living room and told us you just needed a minor bridge loan to cover a temporary banking error. You told us Kendra was acting out of pure spite. You asked us for our retirement funds to save a company you had already gutted from the inside out." Connor stammered aggressively, pulling at the collar of his tuxedo jacket as if it were suddenly choking him. "Brenda, you have to understand," he pleaded, his voice dropping into a desperate whiny register. "The market shifted. The development costs were higher than I anticipated. I had to maintain a certain image to attract the right tier of investors." Jada needed to look the part. We had to project success to attract success. It was all a calculated business strategy. I was going to pay the corporate accounts back as soon as the new funding round closed. It was just a temporary reallocation of resources. A temporary reallocation of resources, I repeated, shaking my head in pure amazement at his endless capacity for delusion. You stole $500,000 from your own investors to buy your wife shiny objects. That is not a business strategy, Connor. That is a federal crime. And you actually had the sheer audacity to think you could bully me into covering your tracks. I did not stop there. I leaned forward, locking my eyes entirely on Desmond's pale, furious face. "Flip to the final page of the audit, Desmond," I instructed, my tone dropping into a deadly, uncompromising register. "The embezzlement is just the prologue. Look at what he did to you." Desmond's hands shook as he turned to the very back of the folder. He stared at the densely packed legal contract, his eyes scanning the fine print. "2 months ago, Connor asked you to sign corporate guarantor forms to secure his bridge loan," I said, my voice ringing out over the paralyzed room. "You didn't read the fine print. You blindly trusted him. But that was not a routine form. It was a direct collateral assignment. Connor secretly leveraged your fully paid-off retirement estate as collateral for a high-interest predatory loan. And because he has defaulted on every payment, the lenders are legally initiating foreclosure on your home this Monday." Brenda's face went chalk white. She let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Desmond stood up so fast his heavy chair crashed backward onto the marble floor. Driven by pure, unrestrained devastation, he grabbed Connor by the collar right there in the crowded dining room, hauling him halfway across the table. Total financial ruin stared my parents directly in the face. Their pristine world was entirely gone. Jada, hysterical and crying, turned to me. Her delusion shattered, she abandoned all dignity. "You have to fix this," she screamed, gesturing wildly. "You have to pay it off. You have a Maserati, you can afford a $3 million bailout. Your family." I stood up slowly, smoothing out the front of my emerald dress with immaculate, deliberate grace. I looked down at the people who had abandoned me on the most important day of my life, their toxic empire finally reduced to absolute ashes. "You chose your priority 10 months ago," I said, my voice carrying perfectly over the dead silent room. "I'm just respecting your decision. Have a beautiful evening." The air outside the Oakwood Country Club was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating toxicity of the ballroom we had just left behind. Trevon handed the valet our ticket, and within minutes the deep, satisfying purr of the Maserati shattered the quiet night. We drove away from the glittering estate without a single backward glance. The silence in the car was not tense. It was the profound, resonant quiet of a war finally concluded. 3 weeks later, the absolute destruction of Connor's manufactured empire was complete. The fallout was swift, merciless, and brutally public. The financial audit I had dumped on that linen tablecloth acted as the ultimate catalyst. By Monday morning, his remaining investors had filed emergency injunctions. Federal regulators swarmed his pristine downtown offices, seizing hard drives and freezing every single corporate and personal account tied to his name. The embezzlement charges were staggering. He was facing a multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit from the defrauded venture capitalists, and the sheer scale of his financial crimes guaranteed a lengthy prison sentence. Jada's reality disintegrated with spectacular speed. The luxury condo they had been renting using diverted seed money was immediately seized. I heard through the Atlanta real estate grapevine that it took 3 moving trucks to clear out the designer bags, shoes, and couture gowns she had stockpiled. The imported Range Rover she loved to flaunt was repossessed directly from the underground parking garage in broad daylight. She was forced to move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, her carefully curated social media accounts suddenly going dark. The high society friends she had bought with stolen champagne completely abandoned her the second the federal investigations hit the local news. But the most devastating collateral damage landed squarely on Desmond and Brenda. The predatory bridge loan Connor had manipulated them into guaranteeing defaulted immediately. To avoid the sheer public humiliation of a bank foreclosure, my parents were forced to list their sprawling, beloved retirement estate for a massive, catastrophic loss. The for sale sign hammered into their manicured front lawn was the ultimate symbol of their defeat. Their pristine social standing within the Oakwood Country Club was entirely annihilated. The wealthy elite they had desperately courted for decades treated financial ruin like a highly contagious disease. Their phone calls went unanswered. Their dinner invitations evaporated. They were effectively exiled from the only world they had ever valued. I was standing in the grand sunlit lobby of my firm's newest venture when the past finally caught up to me one last time. It was a Tuesday afternoon. We had just secured the final city permits for our luxury boutique hotel in Midtown. The space was magnificent, featuring imported Italian marble floors, soaring 20-foot ceilings, and bespoke modern art installations that Trevon had personally curated. I was reviewing a stack of vendor contracts with my lead contractor when a sudden commotion near the revolving glass doors broke my concentration. Brenda bypassed the front security desk with the frantic, erratic energy of a drowning woman. She looked completely unrecognizable from the glittering, calculating matriarch who had held court at the charity gala. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her posture was slumped, and the heavy, expensive makeup she wore could not hide the dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. The sheer panic radiating from her was palpable. She spotted me standing near the concierge desk and practically ran across the marble floor. My security detail immediately stepped forward to intercept her, but I raised a single hand, signaling them to hold their position. I wanted to hear exactly what she had to say. "Kendra?" Brenda gasped, her voice cracking as she stopped 3 feet away from me. She was physically trembling, her manicured hands clutching the strap of her purse like a lifeline. "I need to talk to you. Please. You have to listen to me." I did not adjust my posture. I did not offer a polite greeting. I simply looked at her with the cool, detached professionalism I reserved for difficult contractors. "You have exactly 2 minutes, Brenda. I am running a business." The coldness of my tone seemed to physically strike her, but desperation propelled her forward. "We are losing the house, Kendra," she cried, tears spilling over her eyelashes and cutting tracks through her foundation. "The bank is demanding the principal balance on Connor's loan. Desmond is having chest pains from the stress. We have absolutely nowhere to go. The social stigma is destroying us." She reached out, attempting to grab my forearm, but I took a deliberate, calculated step backward, denying her the physical contact. She let her hands drop to her sides in defeat. "I need a room," she begged, her voice dropping into a pathetic, whimpering register. "Just one of the suites here at your new hotel, just until we can figure out a temporary living situation. And a loan, Kendra. Just a personal loan to cover the legal retainer to fight the bank. You have so much capital tied up in these commercial properties. $100,000 is nothing to you now. You can easily afford to help us." I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the staggering depth of her entitlement. She had spent my entire life diminishing my achievements, prioritizing Jada's manufactured success, and actively attempting to sabotage my commercial real estate firm. Yet the moment her fabricated world collapsed, she expected me to serve as her unconditional financial safety net. "You are asking me to finance the fallout of your own catastrophic decisions?" I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the vast open lobby. "You chose to leverage your retirement to protect a fraud. You chose to ignore my warnings." Brenda's face crumpled. She resorted to the final desperate weapon in her arsenal, the manufactured apology. "I am sorry," she sobbed, the tears flowing freely now. "I am so incredibly sorry for everything. I should have listened to you. I should never have missed your wedding. That was a terrible, unforgivable mistake. I see that now. You are my daughter, Kendra. I was just trying to protect the family image. I was blinded by Connor's promises. Please, you have to forgive me." The afternoon sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported marble. The sounds of construction from the upper floors, the steady thrum of drills, and the distant shouts of workers provided a stark industrial soundtrack to her tearful breakdown. This hotel was a testament to my grit, my countless sleepless nights, and the unwavering partnership I shared with Trevon. Every pristine surface, every carefully designed architectural detail represented my independence. Brenda, standing here crying over her lost country club status, felt like a bizarre intrusion from a parallel universe I no longer inhabited. She continued to weep, her shoulders shaking violently. She recounted the humiliation of the past 3 weeks in agonizing detail. She described the moment the bank sent the formal notice of default, the way Desmond had aged 10 years overnight, the vicious gossiping phone calls she had received from women she once considered her closest confidants. She laid all her misery at my feet, fully expecting me to bend, to break, to revert to the desperate approval-seeking daughter I had been a decade ago. She was waiting for the familiar rush of familial guilt to overwhelm my logic. The tears flowed, but they did not touch me. Brenda looked up, wiping her eyes clearly, waiting for me to pull out my checkbook to offer her a luxury suite, to welcome her back into my life with open arms. She took a deep, shuddering breath and deployed the ultimate manipulation tactic, the one she had used to control Desmond, Jada, and me for my entire childhood. "We are blood, Kendra," she whispered, her voice thick with engineered emotion. "At the end of the day, family is all we have. Blood is thicker than water. You cannot just turn your back on your own mother and father when they are standing on the edge of total ruin. We raised you. We gave you the foundation to become this successful woman. You owe us your compassion." I stood perfectly still, letting her words hang in the cool, air-conditioned air of the lobby. 10 years ago, that speech would have crushed me. It would have triggered a desperate, frantic need to prove my worth, to hand over whatever she demanded, just to secure a fleeting, microscopic crumb of maternal validation. I would have sacrificed my own financial stability to save her from the consequences of her own toxic favoritism. But standing there now, beneath the modern chandeliers I had paid for with my own money, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger. There was no lingering resentment. There was no desire to scream or exact further punishment. There was only a profound, crystalline emptiness. The emotional cord that had tethered me to her manipulation was completely, permanently severed. I looked at her crying face and simply saw a stranger dealing with the outcome of a very bad business transaction. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice or offer a tearful rebuttal. I reached into the sleek leather portfolio I was carrying and pulled out a single thick embossed business card. I held it out to her. Brenda reached for it eagerly, a flash of desperate hope illuminating her tear-streaked face. She thought it was the contact information for my private banker, or perhaps the direct line to a luxury hotel manager who would arrange her complimentary suite. She snatched the card and looked down at the bold black lettering. The hope vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer uncomprehending shock. "This is the contact information for Marcus Vance." I explained, my tone entirely devoid of emotion. "He is one of the most reputable bankruptcy and debt restructuring advisors in Atlanta. He specializes in high-net-worth liquidations and foreclosure avoidance. Tell his secretary my office referred you, and he will likely waive his initial consultation fee." Brenda stared at the card as if it were a venomous snake. "A bankruptcy advisor!" She choked out, her voice trembling with fresh, humiliated rage. "I am asking you for a room and a family loan, and you hand me a card for a bankruptcy lawyer. I am your mother." "You are a woman who co-signed a fraudulent loan for a criminal," I corrected her, stepping back and clasping my hands together. "Marcus can help you navigate the asset liquidation process legally. That is the only assistance I am providing. Do not come to my businesses again, Brenda. Do not call my office, and do not attempt to contact Trayvon." I turned my head slightly and gave a subtle, practiced nod to the head of my security detail, a towering, broad-shouldered man who had been watching the interaction closely from the front doors. He immediately stepped forward, flanked by another guard. They moved with quiet, imposing efficiency. "Ma'am, it is time for you to leave the premises." The head of security said, his voice deep and authoritative. He did not touch her, but his physical presence left absolutely no room for debate. Brenda looked from the security guards to me, her eyes wide with the sudden crushing realization that she had completely lost all power. The manipulation had failed. The guilt trip had evaporated. There were no more buttons left to push. She clutched the bankruptcy advisor's card in her fist, her face tight with defeat. She turned on her heel and walked toward the revolving glass doors, escorted out of my lobby, out of my business, and permanently out of my life. I watched her figure disappear down the busy Atlanta sidewalk until she was swallowed by the crowd. I did not feel a single pang of regret. I turned back to my contractor, picked up my pen, and resumed reviewing the lighting invoices as if the interruption had never occurred. The story closes at dusk, high above the frantic energy of the city streets. The humid Georgia heat had finally broken, leaving behind a cool, refreshing evening breeze. Trevon and I were standing on the expansive penthouse balcony of our absolute newest commercial acquisition, a soaring 30-story glass tower that we had successfully closed on just 48 hours prior. It was our largest, most ambitious project to date, a crown jewel in our expanding real estate portfolio. The Atlanta skyline stretched out before us, a glittering sea of gold and white lights that we were slowly, methodically conquering. The view was magnificent, a vast canvas of endless corporate opportunity. I leaned against the heavy glass railing, the cool metal soothing against my skin. The city below was alive with movement, but up here, insulated by our success, the world was perfectly still. Trevon stepped up behind me, wrapping his strong arms around my waist and pulling me back against his solid chest. He rested his chin on my shoulder, looking out at the city we were building our empire upon. He did not ask about the incident in the lobby earlier that afternoon. My security team had already briefed him, and he knew I did not need to dissect the encounter. He simply held me, his silent presence offering the unwavering, unconditional support I had spent my entire life searching for. There was no heavy exposition needed between us. There was no lingering sadness weighing down my spirit. The ghosts of my childhood, the desperate need for Desmond's approval, the suffocating shadow of Brenda's impossible standards, they were all gone, swept away by the brutal, cleansing light of reality. I had faced the absolute worst of their toxicity and emerged not just intact, but entirely victorious. Trevon handed me a crystal flute filled with perfectly chilled vintage champagne. The condensation beaded on the glass, catching the ambient light of the city. We raised our glasses together in the quiet twilight. The sharp melodic clink of the crystal rang out clearly in the evening air, a toast to our resilience, our partnership, and our hard-won empire. Far below on the street level, I heard the distinct, satisfying roar of my Maserati engine echoing loudly from the valet station, a mechanical beast ready to carry us home. I took a slow sip of the champagne, letting the crisp, dry taste ground me in the present moment. I looked out over the glowing skyline, feeling a profound, unbreakable peace settling deep into my bones. It was the absolute, unshakable tranquility of a woman who had finally, cleanly, and permanently severed the dead weight.